Good morning, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. And so we're going to start going through Bart Ehrman's videos, just like I'm going through Cornthwaite's from the beginning. This is the first video that appears on Bart Ehrman's YouTube channel. And so it's Manifold Greatness, which I think was the beginning of a type of conference responding to the 400-year anniversary of the King James Version in... well, it says here it's in 2013, so it's a little bit later. But this video basically is Bart Ehrman talking about the King James. Now, for quite a lot of this, it's general knowledge. Some of the stuff that he says is not argued against. And so we're just going to go through this whole video. We're going to look at everything. Hopefully we can get it done in one session. But if not, we'll just do 2 or 3 or whatever it takes. We don't want to rush through things. We want to make sure that we cover every base. Now, one of the reasons why I'm going through the material of the atheist agnostics from the beginning is because I don't want to miss anything. And what I find is sometimes people, they're saying the same type of things as others, but they're just using what I would say are highfalutin words. And so they're either trying to impress people with more difficult terminology, or sometimes that's just the way you end up talking when you have to do geeky sort of things. And I know myself, sometimes people will ask me about the Textus Receptus or the King James. I'll start waffling on, and you can tell they've already glazed over, like at the 1 minute mark, because I've said 3 or 4 terms they didn't understand, and so this is one of the reasons why I'm going through from the beginning, and I want to cover every base. Now with Bart Ehrman, I have probably at this moment in time, like around 2013, I'd gone through his misquoting Jesus, Jesus Interrupted, God's Problem, and then I got into Forged. That was probably around 2020. I got into Forged. There was a few that I didn't really feel like I wanted to get into, but his first 2 books, definitely Jesus Interrupted, and what was the other one? Misquoting Jesus. Those 2 were just on my audio feed. I was constantly listening to these and just trying to get into the mindset of what he's getting at. Because he was so revered in the academy, it seems like he is one of the type of guys who, if you can know what he knows, you sort of know what 95% of text critics know. And being a student of Metzger, he's obviously going to have, some insight into things and into the critical text that most other people wouldn't have. And so that's why we're doing what we're doing. But what we see along the way is Bart Ehrman is, like, to me, he is just an intellectual guy who is promoting something that is that you cannot faithfully promote with a good conscience. And so this is one of the reasons why when I go through James White, Mark Ward, Dan Wallace, etc., all I usually have to do is just point out problems and just go, well, why these guys say they're Christians? Why aren't they dealing with these things? How can you have God preserved his Bible on one hand, but, oh, no, these 12 verses should not be there on the other, or we're not really sure about this, or most manuscripts don't have this. Is that preservation? It just doesn't make any sense. And so that's the schizophrenic nature that modern-day Christianity has turned into. Modern-day Christians are schizophrenics. 1 minute they're saying out of one side of their mouth that the Bible is faithful, and you'll even hear Cornthwaite say this type of thing, I believed in inerrancy, I believe the Bible was, 100% without error, and all this type of stuff. But then out of the other side of his mouth, he's saying, Jesus used the Septuagint. And one thing I caught Bart Ehrman saying just recently, he was making a case that Jesus did not speak Greek, sort of trying to downplay Jesus. You know how he downplays Peter to be just this, semi-literate, probably more on the verge of illiterate half-wit from Galilee, a fisherman with a big forehead and buck teeth, and he how could he write Second Peter sort of thing? But he sort of does the same type of thing with Jesus, where he's like, well, he didn't know Greek. When he was talking to Pilate, he probably had a translator and all this. And there's interesting things to look at in all those cases. But at the end of the day, doesn't he say that Jesus used the Septuagint? And then on one hand, he's saying he didn't know Greek. On the other hand, he's saying he used the Septuagint, which is a contradiction. And so that's why I'm going through from the beginning, looking at these type of claims. And I sort of found this, like say someone like James White. I went through lots and lots and lots of his material to the point where I just sort of knew what he was going to say next, because I just became familiar with what he was saying. And of course, there's going to be things, because Bart Ehrman is an academic, he's going to say things that we don't really know what he's talking about. And we look into it and go, oh, that's what he's saying. Now, he's written so many books, and even while he was in the walls of, Christianity, he did the orthodox corruption of Scripture. But many times he's today referring back to that work. And when you look at it, it's just as unbelieving as some of the stuff he's bringing out today. Now, in one of his latest videos, he says that Jezebel is put into a bed. Now, the vast majority of translators know that if you're put into a bed, you're sick. That's what happened. When you're sick, you go to bed, But no, Bart Ehrman, of course, he knows the languages better than anyone. And he said, no, it's not a sick bed. It is just a bed where she can be raped. And her children who are born because of these rapes, because God ordained these rapes, are going to be murdered by God. And it's like he's talking about Revelation chapter 2. And I'm like, man, that is the strangest, weirdest interpretation. But what I see, when I look at Bart Ehrman, like when I was growing up, I knew some pretty wild characters, some pretty wild people who were, right into heavy metal and trying to be evil. You know what I mean? Trying to be like the scary guy who's, usually it comes out of fear themselves, that they're worried they're going to get bashed up, or they've had a bad life and their dad used to hit them or whatever, and so they have to have this tough veneer that hey, don't mess with me sort of thing. And they end up having to be scary. But when you're friends with these people, you realize how sort of pathetic that is, and you sort of see that in yourself, and you're like, well, yeah, why do I walk around like looking all tough and all that? It's fear. It's actually, I'm afraid, that I'll get bashed. And so a lot of people do martial arts and stuff like that because they're afraid they're going to get bashed up. So it's amazing how many things we do in life out of fear. And one thing I see with Bart Ehrman, when I look at him, I just picture some dude with like long hair and nose rings and like tattoos all over him, and just like some guy who you would meet at the pub trying to be the toughest guy in town and just say all this rubbish. To me, like Bart Ehrman's like that. That's his spirit. He just says the most outlandish things. And a lot of people don't pull him up on that type of stuff. And I guess one thing is his material usually doesn't touch Textus Receptus, King James people at all, because he's in the academy. He's in the critical text sphere. And so when he says, well, there's a contradiction here, oftentimes there is. I'm saying the same thing. I'm saying, yeah, there's a contradiction there in the ESV. If you read it here and you read this and you say the Septuagint says this and you say the Masoretic text says this, there's a problem. That's why you stick with the King James. That's why you stick with the Masoretic text, Textus Receptus, etc. But he says stuff, and that's the whole critical text camp is rattled, because half the time he's saying rubbish, but the other half he's just pointing out facts. And so it doesn't rattle me. It doesn't rattle people who know the truth, but it rattles those who are already in that strange place where they've got an affinity with a certain text, and they're out of one side of their mouth saying, yes, I believe in preservation, I believe God's involved, but then like, oh, God makes mistakes, and yeah, God's got this strange way of preserving his word, and they have to dress everything up, where he just strips it naked and goes, hey, look at this. And people are left there in doubt, in unbelief, in shock. And like even James White, he will do this to a certain extent. He'll go around and say, hey, look up this verse in your Bible, and it's not there, and then he'll get someone with a New King James or a King James to read it, and it's like, oh, see, it's in that text, but it's not in your text. But then he'll just have the little caveat like, still believe, still trust in God, where Bart Ehrman is like, don't bother believing. Why? There's probably not a God, sort of thing. So it's pretty much the same sort of thing, but that doesn't really affect TR people, does it? We know those verses are in there. I've studied this for years and years and years. I haven't had one compelling case where someone's put something before me and said, hey, this verse shouldn't be in the Bible. The more I study it, the more I'm like, well, no, you just need to study this more. That's usually what it comes to. People oftentimes are not studying enough. They're not getting to a level where they're given over to a certain thing. And of course, why would you, if you're in the critical text camp or a majority text camp, you've got no interest in trying to defend a TR reading. And so you're not going to give as much effort as someone who's a TR person. You will look at everything. And this is one of the things I find, people don't look at everything. But anyway, we're talking about Bart Ehrman here, and I want to get into this video. We have Alpha and Omega is in the house. We've got a few other people watching, but I'm going to get straight into this. I'll make sure the volume is good. Now, this is a blurry video. It's an older one. It looks like it's done sort of like a bit of a home job. And the volume, it seems like the volume or the audio is, because when you're filming from the crowd, when the crowd claps or laughs, that gets really loud. And so sorry about that. There's not much I can do about it. And as I said, a lot of this video is stuff that's just general knowledge, but I want to go through every single one of Bart Ehrman's videos. I know it's a big task, but you got to start somewhere. And so we're just going to start doing that right now.
So my name's Jamie, and I am the outreach librarian here at the William H. Hannon Library.
Okay, so some of these people talk really fast. I've got it on 1.25, but I'll put this girl on 1. Now, when Bart starts, I might speed it up a little bit. But, okay, Manifold Greatness, the creation and afterlife of the King James Bible. And I can't read any of that, but let's continue.
And I want to thank all of you for coming out to celebrate the opening of Manifold Greatness with us tonight. This is the culmination of nearly 2 years worth of work and waiting, and I'm delighted that this day is finally here. We were one of 40 academic and public libraries that were selected across the country to host the traveling exhibition of Manifold Greatness. It was created to celebrate the 400th anniversary of the King James Bible in 2011. And it was organized by the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C., and the American Library Association's Public Programs Office. It's based on an exhibition of the same name developed by the Folger Shakespeare Library and the Bodleian Library at the University of Oxford, with assistance from the Harry Ransom Center for the University of Texas. This exhibition was also made possible by a major grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. So after tonight's talk, all are invited to join us in the atrium to view the exhibition, along with the companion exhibit of rare books in Archives and Special Collections, which is called Singular Wisdom, the King James Bible and Early Printed Bibles. And then copies of Dr. Ehrman's books are also going to be available for sale and signing. If you enjoy yourself tonight, I do want to encourage you to help us spread the word and consider attending one of the other 3 events that we have planned over the next month, and that you see briefly described behind me. We also have these available for you to take with you. It's taken an army of collaborators and partners to make this happen, and I need to extend my sincere gratitude to the following supporters. So my colleagues here at the library, the LMU Office of the Provost, the Office of the Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education, the Department of Theological Studies, Young Presidential Associates, the Center for Religion and Spirituality, Campus Ministry, the William Andrews Clark Library at UCLA, and the Inglewood Public Library. And finally, I need to thank my guide to all things New Testament, who did not know what he was getting into when he picked up the phone back in March 2011 when I called to ask him for advice. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure he would have just let it go to voicemail. And conveniently forgotten about it. So please join me in thanking and welcoming LMU Theological Studies Professor Jeffrey Syker, who will introduce tonight's speaker.
There we go. Thank you very much, Jamie. I didn't answer the first time she called. Or actually the second, then I got an email that said she wasn't going to let up, so I said, all right. It's a real honor to be able to introduce Bart Ehrman. Bart and I go back longer than I'd care to think. We were both students at Princeton Theological Seminary together doing our PhDs. He was a few years ahead of me, and I'll never forget the first time I met him. I walked into the graduate study office where every graduate student basically built a small castle on a desk where their stuff was. And Bart, this is before the age of computers, Bart had all of these 3x5 index cards because he was collating manuscripts from a guy by the name of Didymus the Blind. And I remember asking Bart, so what does it mean to look at manuscripts by a guy who was blind? You know, and he said, good question. And he never really answered it, but so we've been talking ever since. At any rate, let me give you the formal spiel.
And so, obviously Bart Ehrman is seen in the academy as like a rock star. It's sort of like, he's got legendary status, like it's like Paul McCartney's turned up, or the Rolling Stones are in the house, sort of thing. Mick Jagger's here. And so you can tell, people just have, people don't have a bad word to say about him whatsoever. And so you'll never really get Bart critiqued in this type of atmosphere. Obviously, people do critique him, but when it comes to academics, you don't want to say bad things about. Like, imagine a guy like this. If he was a true, genuine pastor, which I doubt he is, he would just say, hey, Bart Ehrman has come against, the truths of the Bible. He's a Bible skeptic. People say he's a radical skeptic. He said some things that are questionable. And, imagine introducing him like that. But obviously, they invite people, and you have to be nice. And half the time, these type of events, it's like a funeral. You can't say a bad word because you're going to upset someone. But sometimes it's interesting to listen to how people fawn over someone like Bart Ehrman. And this is why you get people like Derek from Myth Vision will just believe everything that Bart Ehrman says. Cornthwaite, CJ Cornthwaite, he said that he pretty much believes everything that Bart Ehrman says. And so these guys just have put Bart Ehrman up as guru status. He's the guru. And it's an interesting thing where I rarely bother that much with atheism and agnosticism, because these type of things are so easily debunked. Like, you have to have a lot of faith to believe in nothing, or you have to have you have to have tons of faith to say you're an atheist. Like that is you have to have more faith to say that than to say that God is like a purple elephant or something. Like at least if you have a God, you're halfway there. You know, like to say there's no God, like it's such a huge statement, because it's like, who made everything then? How did you get design, and how did you get times and seasons and the sun, the moon, the stars? And, you know, we're just a tiny bit closer to the sun and we're frizzled, a tiny bit further away and we freeze to death, or the tides wouldn't work if the moon wasn't there. And, you know, just everything's perfect in a sense where, you know, for us to exist and everything like that. And to say there's no God involved in that, it's just a huge faith claim. And so oftentimes I don't bother, because I used to be an atheist. I guess it's one of those things where I know how dumb it is and how stupid it is. And so I just can't be bothered. But what I'm realizing is these guys are gravitating less toward the Dawkins type of stuff. And they're gravitating more toward, you know, text critics and people who are critical of the Bible. And so obviously Bart Ehrman comes into play with that. Now, usually our interest in Bart Ehrman is because we're defending the Textus Receptus. He's in the critical text camp, and he's pretty much saying exactly the same things when he's talking about the text and everything like that. He's saying the same things that like a Dan Wallace would say, or a James White. There might be a few little, you know, different things here and there, but most of the time they're going to say, no, Jesus used the Septuagint here. No, Jesus, there's a mistake here. Jesus contradicts himself here, or this was copied from Mark, and you know this you know, other thing. The Q source is what we're really, you know, hoping to find evidence of, and we just see this all the way through critical text methodology. So I sort of thought, well, you know, because after a while you get a bit tired of looking at, you know, James White say the same sort of stuff over and over, and Dan Wallace and Mark Ward and others. So I thought, well, maybe I can jump into this arena. And it's so easy to go through their material and debunk it, because it's the same stuff. And I've mentioned this story a million times, but I'll say it again. When I was a Christian, first became a Christian in 1995. And in my first year of salvation, I had the Jehovah's Witnesses come to my house about 100 times. Now, they would constantly come around, talk about how the Trinity's bad, talk about how, you know, Easter's pagan, talk about how, you know, their Bible's better. And so I got their Bible. I had the Kingdom Interlinear translation, the Greek parallel, Jehovah's Witness one, and they were giving me tons of stuff on the Trinity. And I'm going through it all. And it just sort of got to the point where after like a year of studying and thinking and going through all this sort of stuff, and during that time, I think it was the first 7 months of my Christianity, I wasn't working. So I had been working, I'd saved up a bunch of money, and then I'm able to just basically be at home and study the Bible. And so that was fantastic as a new Christian to be able to do that. Because I've seen a lot of people, they just, the next day they're at work and people are like, oh, you become a Christian, huh? And they're just mocking them and full on with them. And it can be hard for them to come home and study. And you only got so much energy and time in the day. But I had sort of unlimited time. So I was either street preaching, out witnessing to people, or I was studying the Bible or arguing with religious people like Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses and others. And so what I realized was after a while, I sort of got my head around the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm like, actually, these guys are a cult. They're off the wall. Their Bible is wrong. It's got all these mistakes in it. And inadvertently, I didn't realize that I was preparing myself for the whole Bible version issue, because there's not much difference between what Jehovah's Witnesses say and what critical text people say. I know they try to make out their poles apart. You know, you can never even put the Jehovah's Witness Bible in amongst your Orthodox Protestant Bible sort of thing. But there's not that much difference. Or most of the omissions are the same. There might be a little extra word here and there. something that, makes out that Jesus isn't God, or, that type of thing. But the vast majority of it is the same. They are both based upon the corrupt Westcott and Hort manuscripts of Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. But the thing is, Jehovah's Witnesses are trained to know that their text is based on Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. If they come to your door, if you start the Bible version issue with them, don't go into the Trinity, don't go into how Jesus is God and all the rest of it. Just say, yeah, I know your Bible is based upon the Westcott and Hort text. And you start going through Vaticanus and Sinaiticus and explaining the problems with that they're already on that level. They're learning that stuff. Where most Protestant people are like, oh no, the King James is the same. And, it's like that they don't even know. But it was interesting. So when I jumped into the whole arena of textual criticism, I was like, hang on, this NIV has that verse taken out as well. So does this one. And I was realizing that the Bibles that a lot of other Christians were using were these corruptions. So I just continually gravitated more towards the Textus Receptus. All through that time, I was a New King James guy. But eventually I realized that some of the arguments I had didn't work with the New King James. The King James was stronger, and it just made more sense. And just to go, well, the New King James has problems. After I sort of solidified that in my mind, I just gravitated way more to the King James, to the point where I'm like, I can't find fault with it. I can't find error with it. And if there has been perceived errors along the way where I'm like, I can't figure that out, and I'm trying. Usually it's like a year later, someone writes an article on it, and it's, KJVtoday.net, or Will Kinney's written about it, and I read through it and go, well, there you go. That answers everything, and it's quite amazing. It's one of those things where it's like with the creation issue. Once you get to the point where you're like, yeah, well, God made everything. The Bible says that God created everything in 6 days, probably 6,000 years ago, this type of thing. Once you've sort of solidified those things in your mind, because it's making so much sense, and plus the Bible says so, you're like defaulting to that position. You can get a little bit lazy with that. With a presuppositional position, you can just be like, oh, yeah, well, they've found a bone that they're saying is, 40,000 years old. Okay, we don't agree with those dates. And you just, after a while, just can't even be bothered looking into that. Where the creation science crew, I appreciate that they do that hard work. But at the end of the day, I'm not finding faults with the King James. I'm getting presented with the best argumentation from the King James only controversy author, James White, Dan Wallace is putting this stuff before me. A whole bunch of other people saying King James onlyism is a cult. I'm debating people left, right, and center. I just don't find any of their arguments convincing whatsoever. And so, anyway, we'll continue to go through this. Tribe with Fire says, greetings, Nick and all. Do you know if Soka is a Jesuit or just from a Jesuit school? I think it was from Loyola, so it does seem like a Jesuit school, and I'm not sure who he actually is. So, Alfred Omega, I remember you was in the chat on my stream the other day. Okay. All right, let's continue.
Professor Ehrman. There might be some editorializing, you can never tell. Bart Ehrman is the James A. Gray Distinguished Professor at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. He's been at UNC since 1988, after 4 years of teaching at Rutgers. And at the University of North Carolina, he has served as the Director of Graduate Studies. He chaired the department. He has won distinguished teaching awards there. He received his Masters of Divinity and PhD from Princeton Theological Seminary, following his BA from Wheaton College. And he worked with the person who was clearly the preeminent textual critical scholar in the United States, at least, Professor Bruce Metzger, who was a wonderful, wonderful human being. And I imagine Bart may have some stories he wants to share. But since finishing at Princeton, Bart has let no dust settle under his pen. He is the author or editor of 24 books. I think by the end of this year, it's going to rise to 28, if I'm not mistaken. Tons of articles, dozens of book reviews. He's just incredibly prolific, and the rest of the guild is rather jealous and envious.
So in my eyes, it's sort of like someone who's writing for the Watchtower. They're writing a whole bunch of stuff, but it's filled with errors. It's filled with strange and weird concepts, and that it doesn't help you. Your volume of writing doesn't help you if what you're saying is flawed.
Many of the books that he's written have been on the New York Times bestseller list, which is why he's made it on the Colbert Report a couple of times and on the Jon Stewart Daily Show once. And I don't think any of the more conservative places have invited you yet, but it is true that Bart has engaged in all kinds of public debates with relatively conservative theological voices across the country, since his own roots lie in a more conservative tradition. Among his most recent books are the Greek-English edition of the Apostolic Fathers in the Loeb Class of the Library series, so it is kind of the go-to volume for the Apostolic Fathers. Also, he's published an assessment of the newly discovered Gospel of Judas with Oxford University Press, and then 4 New York Times bestseller books: Jesus Interrupted, God's Problem, looking at the view of suffering, Misquoting Jesus, which is probably the most surprising book that made it on the New York Times bestseller list. And I think it made it to number 3, if I'm not mistaken. And it's on text criticism, of all things, which is not the sexiest subject on the face of the planet, typically, but Bart managed to pull it off. And then most recently, Forged, which looks at why some books in the New Testament are, in fact, deliberate forgeries. His books have been translated into 27 languages, and I asked him if Algonquin had been one of them. Algonquin was apparently the first Bible published in the United States. Bart and I were wondering how many Algonquins actually read it. At any rate, among Bart's fields of scholarly expertise are the historical Jesus, early Christian Apocrypha, Apostolic Fathers, manuscript tradition of the New Testament, and I should also add the history of the reception of the New Testament text. Bart is a text critic and has been busy working on the task of reestablishing or establishing as best we can the most original version of the New Testament, but he's also been very influential at pushing the guild.
So did you notice that? Listen to this.
Of the New Testament, and I should also add the history of the reception of the New Testament text. Bart is a text critic and has been busy working on the task of reestablishing or establishing as best we can the most original version of the New Testament, but he's also...
And of course, the best text that he says is available is the Nestle Alarm 28th edition, just like all the other text critics say. And so, isn't it strange that he's still in that he's basically a predictable product of the Academy? He's still selling that same type of product.
Been very influential at pushing the guild of text critics beyond simply the New Testament into looking at, all right, well, what were the texts that the early church fathers used? What were the texts that these other people used? And so very much looking at regional and local texts that various folks have used. He has served as president of the Southeast region of the Society of Biblical Literature. He's chaired the New Testament Textual Criticism section of the Society. Has served as the book review editor for the main academic journal, the Journal of Biblical Literature. And he has been the editor of the monograph series on the New Testament and the Greek Fathers. He currently serves as co-editor of the international, the series New Testament Tools, Studies, and Documents. And he's co-editor-in-chief for an international journal, Vigiliae Christianae, which is one of the main journals that looks at early Christianity. And he has served on a bunch of other editorial boards and journals and monographs in the field. He lectures extensively. He has won numerous university awards and grants, including the 2009 Pope Spirit of Inquiry Teaching Award, the 1993 UNC Undergraduate Student Teaching Award, the 94 Prize for Artistic and Scholarly Achievement, and the Bowman and Gordon Gray Award for Excellence in Teaching. Bart also has done several of the tape series on, what's it called again? Tell me.
Teaching Company.
The Teaching Company, yes. And so you may have seen the Teaching Company series that he's done on the New Testament, among other things. And he's just a really brilliant lecturer. He's able to write in ways that people can access and understand what he's talking about, even if he's talking about complicated things.
No, what he does, he talks about things, oversimplifies things, overcomplicates things, and oftentimes he's talking about something that is pretty much made up in his own mind. And so he mightn't have original thoughts on these things. So they might be things that some other text critic has come across, or there might be a manuscript reading that is really weird and really strange and out there, but he'll grab onto that, make it a huge big deal. And so at the end of the day, the people who buy his books think that what he's talking about is a big problem, or it's a secret, that's hidden from most Christians and all this sort of stuff. When at the end of the day, it's none of that. It's just someone just had a really dumb reading, or it's actually his way of interpreting a reading. So say, for example, Codex Bezer, where it has the whole concept of Jesus healing out of anger. He got angry, and the NIV is the only translation I think that has he was indignant. Okay, he was angry, and that comes from Codex Bezer. Now, Codex Bezer, 5th century. Most Christians hold it at arm's length. They're not looking at it closely. TR people would see it as even more corrupt as Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. Vaticanus and Sinaiticus should be in that type of basket where they're just weird, strange manuscripts, but obviously the Academy have said, oh, these are the best. But they're looking at Codex Bezer, and I think it was the 13th edition of the Nestle Aland that they started to put in the footnotes some of the readings of Codex Bezer. Now, that has that reading that Jesus sort of heals out of anger. But the thing is, like, even if it said that, like, it's the only manuscript that has it. And pretty much everyone is saying this manuscript has weird readings. This manuscript has it has a lot of mistakes and things like that. So you obviously don't go with something that's unreliable and just let that usurp everything else. You go with everything else and you see this as an anomaly. But that's not what Bart Ehrman does. Bart Ehrman gets the tiniest little speck and he puts it right up in your face and holds it there, and you're like, oh yeah, I see it now. And then after a while, that's all you can see. When you look at that issue, you're like, oh, Jesus healed out of anger. But it's just one mistake in one manuscript that most people think is lousy anyway. And so it's not honest scholarship. He's a great deceiver. He's like, even if I wasn't a Christian, if I was just looking at, if he was talking about politics, and he said, well, a certain president, just say it was President Bush, said this thing, and it wasn't what he said, and it's just out of context. It's like, well, you're just lying, regardless of whether I agree with if he's good or bad or whatever. You're just lying about something. And so this is what I find with Bart Ehrman. Like, people praise him and say, oh, he's just incredible. He enlightens us with his wisdom and all this sort of stuff. At the end of the day, he's just a liar, and he's just trying to get these saucy little stories and put it on steroids. And so you're given misinformation from Bart Ehrman. You're not given truth. And even like, I was listening to James White once, and he was talking about that issue with Bart Ehrman and Jesus healing from anger. Even James White said, look, in all honesty, he could have been angry with the sickness, if that was a genuine reading, sort of thing. Just say we go, okay, well, everything's wrong except for this one manuscript that most people think is lousy. Just say we go with that reading. Well, couldn't Jesus be angry with, Jesus was angry and healed him because he was really angry with the fact that he was sick. And it was like, because the Bible says in the book of Acts that he went around doing good and healing all those oppressed of the devil. So if he thought that this was an oppression of the devil and he's healed him, then obviously it's not an issue. It doesn't even go against, even if you were to have that reading, it doesn't even go against Scripture. But no, it's got to be Bart Ehrman's way of interpreting it, and it's Jesus just got mad at the sick person. So you've got this tiny little variant that gets blown right out of proportion. And this is, like a main thing in, I think it's Jesus Interrupted. And then, but it's the way he interprets it, that as well. So it's lie upon lie upon lie. It's like an onion. You're just peeling back layers and layers. and it's going to make you cry in the end, So let's just jump onto some of these comments. Hannah says, "Greetings, guys. Grace and peace. Bart is the best. Don't be too hard on him." And it's Ehrman, not Ehrman. Sorry, it must be my Australian accent. If I say he's Ehrman, then it's just because I'm over the other side of the Pacific. Hey, Hannah, with all these activities and stuff, when does one find time to actually read and study the Bible? Yeah. Something tells me maybe Bart isn't that great after all. Well, I think you got my vote there. Bold as a Lion says, "What's going on with BoobTube? My chat was not even showing and there was no place to type. So glad I finally made a live stream. Have missed you, Nick and all." Okay, Bold as a Lion, you made a live stream. Interesting. I don't know anything about that, so you'll have to give us the details. Try with Fire says he probably gets his answers from the homework handed out to his students. I wouldn't doubt it. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I guess if you've got lots of smart kids in your class and they're giving you information and they're pointing out details, and especially if you're asking them to find problems, they can find things. And there you go. There's a whole bunch of groundwork for your latest book. So everyone's just saying hello. Hannah says, "Bold as a Lion. YouTube has been flaky lately. I've been chatting on a lot of these streams and only 50% are getting through. A lot of sarcasm is getting lost." Yeah, what a shame. It must be a depressing place to be when you have a really good joke and you can't share it with anyone and you just sit there laughing to yourself. David Furr's in the house. Bold as a Lion says, "Hey, Calvin, nice to see you." And that's about it. Let's continue.
Bart has two kids, Kelly and Derek, who are both now in their 30s, which is scarier than anything. And he's married to Sarah, who is a professor of theater and medieval English at Duke University, and they make their home in Durham, North Carolina. And we were very pleased to be able to get him out here. So please join me in welcoming Bart Ehrman.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, thank you all for coming out tonight. I've enjoyed being here so far, and enjoyed preparing this lecture on the King James Bible, something that is obviously an enormous cultural artifact and is worth our attention and this exhibition that you have here at LMU. So my talk is what kind of text in the King James Bible, manuscript translation, and the legacy of the King James Version. I want to start by talking about a very brief history of Bible translation, and to begin that, to talk about my first interest in Bible translation. About 25 years ago, before I started teaching at Chapel Hill, I was working for my mentor, Bruce Metzger, who, as Jeff said, is one of the great textual scholars of the 20th century.
And so, he's working for Bruce Metzger, the guru of the last century of the text. Metzger was involved with the Nestle Alarm 28th edition. And this is one of the things, James White says he is a liberal. He says Kurt Aland is a liberal. These people are compromised. They've gone down and visited the Pope and visited the Greek Orthodox leaders, and they're saying, we've now got a Bible that we can all agree on is the Bible, where we've been so separated all these years, and so they're ecumenical, they're compromised, and just in layman's terms, if I was a new Christian, I just imagine myself back in the 1990s, and someone said, "Hey, here's the guru of textual criticism, Bruce Metzger, and here he is with the Pope, and here he is with the leaders of the Greek Orthodox Church saying that they're going to be ecumenical, and that now they've got one Bible, and they chop out 2,900 words, and they change 8,000 words. What do you think about that, Nick?" And I would just go, he's probably a demon-possessed psychopath. That's what I would say. But now you have to say things in a nice way. And so I would just say he is probably just not a Christian. He's a heretic. And hopefully that's a nicer way than saying he's a demon-possessed psychopath. Bruce Metzger, let me just put this down for the record so no one gets this wrong. Bruce Metzger was most probably a heretic. And even if you just read through his first instances, when he's talking about Matthew chapter 1, he's talking about Amos and Amon, and I always Asaph and Asa. I always get those two mixed up with where they go, but they're in Matthew 1, and he basically says that perhaps Matthew made the mistake in the beginning. When Matthew was writing down, instead of saying Vaticanus and Sinaiticus are corrupt documents, we should just get rid of them and just stick with the Bible that we've had forever. No, these are the new kids on the block. Vaticanus, that's been ignored, the poor little thing. And so we have to exalt it to the best. And Sinaiticus, we found this, no one's ever copied these or translated these or really used them at all. But now they're the best. And the rest of the stuff, they're just get rid of it. We don't need it at all. And so they have this strange type of thing. But he says that Matthew made mistakes. And if you read through his commentary, oftentimes he's saying Luke made a mistake here. John made a mistake. If it was John, this type of thing. So these sow seeds into people like Bart Ehrman that the Bible has problems, the Bible has holes. Because how can you say the Bible is preserved, the Bible is accurate, but then turn around and go, yeah, but here it's not preserved and here it's not accurate? You either become a schizophrenic like a lot of pastors are today, saying one thing and believing another, or you be honest with yourself with the information that you've got and you become an agnostic atheist like Ehrman, or you go, hang on, maybe there's an alternative. Maybe the Textus Receptus, a Masoretic text, the King James, maybe that the thing that they're trying really hard for me not to look at, and everyone's saying if you look at that and you become one of those King James only cultists, you don't want to do that. You don't want to be a legalist. You don't want to be an idiot, do you? Maybe that's the truth, And this is one of the things with like someone like Cornthwaite and others who I'm examining. They're not jumping into that camp thinking it's an option, because they're thoroughly saturated with critical text methodology, with all the anecdotes that go along with that of Erasmus being a bozo and King James probably having little kids and molesting. He's the Epstein of the Bible world, so why would you go with him, sort of thing. And this type of slander and this type of rubbish is just saturated the churches. And so oftentimes you'll just be on a forum and you'll just say a fact and you'll just get attacked. And and I guess for years and years I've run these forums on Facebook, and you sort of become a bit of a lightning rod for all these silly arguments. But after a while, all I do is challenge people to offer proof. I say, okay, you're claiming something. Show me the best that you've got. Show me the proof. And you go through it, and it's like, oh, what he called people favorites. So did Henry VIII. But a favorite was just, you're favored, and you're the one who's going to help me. If you're a king, and I think his father got murdered. His mother was Mary Queen of Scots, which is, she was in jail. Elizabeth put her in jail. She was eventually killed. You could be a bit paranoid, and you might want to have, 2 or 3 people. And the whole thing about a bed chamber, it's not like your bedroom. It's a massive area. So you might have, 5 or 6 guards there as your favorites who are staying in your bedroom. Oh, look, he's having sex with these guys. So it's just these saucy type of, BBC, royal family scandal, type of thing. And they're just anachronistically putting it on him and just saying, look, he was a pervert. And there's really no proof of that whatsoever. And even just the fact that a lot of the people who revere the King James translators, after King James died, like they could have had opportunity to come out and say, yeah, you know, unfortunately we had to shut our mouth while he was alive, but yeah, he was terrible. And what about all of his enemies around the world? Like England wasn't liked because it was Protestant. They actually had to go around Europe, and that's why they started trading with the Ottoman Empire. That's why they started trading, you know, going to India and the whole East Indian Company. And that all came out of the fact that they couldn't trade with a lot of places in Europe because it was a Catholic Protestant thing. And there were a lot of problems. There were a lot of issues with that. And so they had to go around Europe. And so anyway, I'm sort of getting a bit ahead of myself here. I'll just read these comments and we'll go back to Bart. But yeah, it doesn't surprise me knowing who owns it. It just really is horrible now. Seems to get worse and worse. Following Truth is saying shalom all. Hello, Following Truth. Helg says hi all ye Bart Ehrman fans. Yeah. Following Truth says Vaticanus and Sinaiticus have been given far too much weight beyond what is reasonable. The long ending of Mark is evidence of this. Just as an interest, what do you make of Bill Wortman's argument on the long ending of Mark on Dwayne Green's channel? I found it fascinating and agreed with it. Yes, I listened to that the other day. I didn't watch it. I listened to it. I was doing other things, but it sounded very good. At first, I didn't like the fact that he was sort of downplaying chiasms, which, and I sort of know because Dwayne Green hosted the Revelation 16:5 debate that I did with TurretinFan, that I used the chiasm issue to point out that there is a pattern in Revelation with these triadic declarations. And the more you study that, I mean, I've written a book on it. You know what I mean? I can't help but know about those issues. And the fact just is that it goes, the middle one, so there's 5 of these, the middle one goes past, present, future, where all the others go present, past, future, all the 4 others. And so that's a chiastic structure. And so I guess he was sort of saying, you know, I'm not really into them. But then in a way, he is sort of putting this chiastic structure into Mark. Like, I know they were just sort of like almost like, you know, chapter headings and this type of thing, or where something stopped and where it started, and, you know, having people coming against the word of God, but then the next thing is a declaration. And I found all that very interesting, and I agree with it. But I think there might be a group out there that I'm not really that sure of, or maybe I'm illiterate on, who was just using the chiastic structures everywhere, and they're not really warranted. But I've gone through the one in Genesis and found it remarkable. I was like, that's really remarkable. That, and in some letters, when you go through them, or like even when I was explaining about the last days in Matthew 24, I know this isn't a chiastic structure, but what his presentation did reminded me of Matthew 24, where Jesus is asked 3 questions. He's like, when will these things be? So it's timing. And what will be the sign? So what's the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So there's 3 things: when and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age, or the end of that period of time. And he answers those in the reverse order. So the last thing, you know, that goes from Matthew 24 from verse 4 to 14. And he says, and this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end shall come. So that's the end of that period of time. Because then he starts talking about the abomination, desolation, etc. So to me, that end is a good place of where, you know, the rapture of the church would appear. And so that's my own view on that. But then he starts talking about the sign, and what will be the sign of your coming. And so he talks about the sign of the Son of Man, and then it's talking about when these things will be. And he has a whole thing about, well, no one knows the day of the hour. It's going to be a sudden thing. He's coming at a time when you don't expect, this type of thing. So he answers those in the reverse order. So when you understand that, you can read Matthew 24 in that type of way. And so that's what I found that he was doing with the book of Mark. And it was interesting too when he started going through Mark and pointing out other things, because this thing here with the long ending, how it had the proclamation of the gospel at the end, which seemed to be the pattern of Mark, and you have to have the long ending for that proclamation. It was interesting too that's he had to explain all that in a really rigorous sort of way. But then when he was a little bit more relaxed on talking about it, he was just bringing out some really good patterns in Mark, explaining those things. So I thought it was really good. But anyway, I didn't like the fact that he was sort of dissing the chiastic structures when some of it seemed chiastic. And so anyway, maybe I need to look into that a little bit more. Tribe with Fire says, and I don't understand how that's even possible, being that the Gnostic epistle of Barnabas and Shepherd of Hermes were included within Sinaiticus. Yeah, I mean, it's these things are corruptions. And so, yeah, Helg is in the house. Following Truth says, yes, Tribe, most Protestants reject these books, but fully accept the authority of these two manuscripts. It's weird. And yeah, it is so strange that someone like Tischendorf is so excited about the Shepherd of Hermes being in Sinaiticus, and it's like, why would you be so excited about that? But I guess, for someone in antiquities, they see that and they're interested in that type of thing. But I mean, wouldn't you be more excited that you found the words of God, the words of Jesus himself, the oldest manuscript, but most of us have our doubts about the age of that manuscript. Igramart says, but Ehrman, the slithering tongue of a serpent in the garden, who said, yea, hath God said, Genesis 3:1. Yes, yeah, Bart Ehrman, yeah. Bold says, that's insane indeed, LJ. How do they not see it? So love to see all the regulars here. And while everyone's here, I'm just going to show you this. Okay, so this is a PDF, so I'll make this larger. How do I make that larger? Here we go. So we have a debate next weekend. And so this is on February the 27th, 2026, 8 p.m. New York Eastern Time. And we have Bible Highlighter. He is debating Matthew Verschure. So Bible Highlighter, he's been interviewed on this channel. And so has Matthew Verschure, actually, quite a few years ago. And Matthew Verschure is Bible Protector. And so they're going to be debating this question. So it's called Textus Receptus KJV Debate. Is knowledge of the original languages necessary for King James Version believers who have access to modern study tools? And so this is going to be live. It's going to be happening, and I guess that's next. Yeah, for us, that's next Saturday. So for Americans, that's next Friday night, around about 8 o'clock New York time. So that'll be interesting. So basically, Matthew Verschure is saying, we don't need to go back to the original languages, the Hebrew to the Greek. Bible Highlighter is saying that we should do those things. So this is going to be an interesting sort of in-house King James debate. So I just sort of throw that up at the moment. I'm about to sort of set up the StreamYard for this. I've just got to make sure that the all the times are correct and everything like that. But so that's coming up. So be great for you guys to join us next weekend for that. I'll put Bart Ehrman back here. And Following Truth says, most Christians have no idea about the reality of these two manuscripts. Yeah, they're just told, it just says in the margin, oldest and best. And all that's in the Bible. It's in the margin of the Bible. It says that. So you can trust these scholars. And Bart Ehrman's like one of them. You know, I used to work with the New Revised Standard Version Committee and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, you've got people like Bart Ehrman who are just basically complete atheists, agnostics. And the people who are believing in these situations aren't that much better. And half the time they all get along. They all get drunk together, doing Bible studies, and you know, I just don't trust these guys. Can you make them both wear tuxedos with top hats and canes? I could do that, but I don't think they would come back. So we want to be nice. The KJV. So Ben says the KJV is faithful, high quality historical translation of the Masoretic text, but it is not the most precise rendering available based on current linguistic and textual scholarship like the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay. I would disagree with that. I would say the Dead Sea Scrolls has problems. Now, it's very close. You can tell it's a Masoretic type text, but there are some places where there's additions or there's subtractions where it doesn't match up with what we have in our knowledge of the faithful Masoretes kept the text all the way through history, but also faithful translations and also quotations of the Word of God. And so we just see the Dead Sea Scrolls. It doesn't go through the acid test. There are some problems with it, but it is a testimony that what we have today is accurate and is old. Now, one thing that's been going through my mind is I don't think the Dead Sea Scrolls are before Christ. Now, this has just been something that's in the back of my mind for probably a year, where when I look into these things and I listen to experts talk about it, many times I'll say, well, Dead Sea Scrolls, it's 200 years before Jesus, and then it sort of went 100 years before Jesus. Then it's like around the birth of Jesus. People are just throwing these dates around who are experts. And it just makes me wonder, like, is there a whole narrative? Because I know around the Septuagint, people just believe the dates of those things, oftentimes by faith. And when you examine claims, they're like, well, this guy quoted the Septuagint. And you look into it and you're examining, you're looking at the Greek and you're like, I'm not seeing that same thing. And then you look at other skeptics or other Christians who have written about certain things, and you're left there going, I don't know. I think people are reading into this. And so I haven't really looked into the Dead Sea Scrolls enough to make that type of decision. But it's just sort of like a gut feeling at the moment where it's like, well, if they're deceptive around the Septuagint, the whole Dead Sea Scroll thing, when they were found, perhaps they're just like 1st century or 2nd century. And, some things are being overlooked. Some things aren't being, truly evaluated the way that they should be. Or even just thinking outside of the box like that. So the thing is, if they find out that it's 2nd century before Christ, it's like, okay, cool, that's fine. But a lot of people don't think outside of the box. And when people don't think outside the box, who are like skeptics and atheists and all the rest of it, why aren't they thinking outside of the box like that? Why aren't like the Cornthwaites and Derek from Myth Vision and Dan McClellan, why aren't they jumping in and talking about the whole Sinaiticus could be a forgery thing? Because it's sort of like their business is still based upon the critical text. So you can't sort of bite the hand that feeds, in a sense where you can do what they're doing, but for them to jump right over into that sort of camp, they would lose a lot of credibility. Like, people, you have to sort of stick within your parameters. That's like being fully flat Earth or something. I'm not saying flat Earth is correct, but you will get this stigma about you, and people will just go, "Oh, he doesn't even think Sinaiticus is old," and so he will probably be rejected by Bart Ehrman and a whole lot of scholars. So anyway, Dead Sea Scrolls, interesting topic. Boulder's Line says, "Oh, Nick, I should have clarified. I finally made it to your live stream." Okay, cool. I thought you said you did your own, but yeah, I was wrong there. Hannah says, "If you haven't checked out Joseph Wisman and his blog, do. He has great articles defending the Masoretic text." Yes, and so he is actually the last guy I've interviewed here on this channel, and his stuff is gold. And what I find too, someone will just say something on the Textus Receptus Academy on Facebook, and he's usually there straight away, like with answers. And someone was pointing out James Price and the New King James. He's a New King James Old Testament guy, and he had all these issues to do with the King James. And he debunked 5 of them, and it seemed like he did it in like a few hours. He just put up this article, and he's got 5 things that he says wrong, and I'm like, man, this guy's good, So it's great to have people on who are knowledgeable in the Masoretic text, the Old Testament, and what he said about Luke chapter 4, where apparently Jesus reads the Septuagint, but then he just brings to light the whole opening of the eyes and opening of the prison doors, and he talks about the Hebrew word and how that can be used in its context. There's no contradiction there whatsoever, and it's just that it is like metaphorical, like opening the eyes of the blind, which is well, he says it a lot better. I can't remember exactly how he said it, but if you want that info, just go back to the video where I did an interview of him. If you go to the Textus Receptus site, tr.org.au, his video is prominent there at the moment. So I'm trying to promote him and all the things that he's doing. But definitely, yeah, that's a really good, Reformed Masora on Substack. So I'm trying to get people interested in that. Hell says, when modern Bible versions are based on and translated from those kinds of manuscripts, which include apocryphal books, they have to be selective, but they are used to treating the text that way. Yeah, and that's the thing. These guys, I don't. When I'm going through the atheist stuff, trying to put myself into the mindset of these guys who go, like I was saying, it's like saying World War II didn't happen, and trying to explain history, and you're going through saying, okay, well, Germany did this, and then France did this, and England did this, and it's like, yeah, but World War II didn't happen. So you're trying to figure something else out, they're just like, no, this book is forged. Second Peter is just late 2nd century. It's a fake because Peter was a dimwit. That's basically what it comes down to. They think he's just a fisherman. He's an idiot. And so they're trying to think in their mindset, and they have 100 of these weird things. So you just end up believing this type of narrative. It's so strange. It's missing pieces all over the place. And that's why I'm going through from the beginning, so we can go, okay, what pieces are they saying that shouldn't be there? And if we can prove that they should be there, like say the last 12 verses of Mark, they're just like, all these atheists are just like, no, they shouldn't be there. Yeah, probably because Bart Ehrman says it. And then it's like, that's just 100% definitive. Last 12 verses of Mark shouldn't be there. And they just say it with such confidence that it sort of shows that they don't realize how flimsy that case is. Because I've seen people who are critical text guys like study through a bunch of stuff and get to that and go, oh, I'm not sure. Like even Stephen Boyce, who I debated on the woman caught in adultery, when it came to the last 12 verses of Mark, he was like, oh, maybe it is genuine. And he started reading Maurice Robinson on that. And I think he's got some stuff, and he was reading through James Nat Jr.'s material on that, because the evidence is so flimsy on their side. But that just shows you the level of scholarship these atheists have, where that's usually the one that I use, where people say, oh, show me an example of poor scholarship in the critical text side. I'm like, last 12 verses of Mark, and just start talking about that. And after a while, people are like, yeah, that's pretty silly, And but the thing is that there's hundreds of those type of things. So imagine trying to read the Bible and you think that the Bible stops at verse 9. Was it verse 8? I think it's verse 8, where the women were afraid. Like, imagine reading that and you get there and it's like, oh, that's it. But that's where most Christians are at. And that's the problem. They're trying to think, yeah, well, that's your real ending. And then they have to adopt, Wes Huff will say, well, at the end of the day, that's where Mark stops, to give the person reading the story the chance to stand up and say, yes, Jesus did rise from the dead. Jesus is God. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, so it's this mistake that sort of launches into this evangelistic crusade. And it's like, how'd you get that? You smoking crack? Like, how did you get that story? I mean, I've heard some people's, psychedelic trances. They've had mushrooms and they've had paper trips and all sorts of things, and they've come out with these elaborate stories about what's happened. But it's all just fantasy. And the thing is, the alternative to the last 12 verses of Mark being genuine, that the alternatives are ridiculous. Like, it's so ridiculous. And that's the one that I go to and say, look how dumb that is. And these atheists and all the rest of it are like, no, those verses shouldn't be there. I'm like, okay, is that your level of scholarship, sort of thing. And so what I'm realizing is that Pornthwaite is basically saying, Bart Ehrman's my go-to guru. Whatever he says, I'll agree with it. Probably because text criticism seems so complicated. But when you understand it's just an art form, so it's a constantly moving and evolving art form. That's why it's like trying to figure out why Picasso painted in a certain way. It's like because he just wanted to. And that's what Peter Gurry says, that text criticism is an art form. It's not a science. They've got in their mind that it's a precise science, and Bart Ehrman's there like with his lab coat on and talking to his fellows and saying, well, we can't justify this reading because the Q, so the whole Q source thing, well, Matthew copied off Mark, and he's got this other verse here, and this Greek word is defined this way. That they think they're standing around doing that, where half the time it's just an art form. And sometimes there's so much evidence for a verse to be in there, but just because Westcott and Hort didn't want the verse in there, it's out. And that it's just really never ever questioned again. It's just still out. and people are like, even Dwayne Green's videos, he's bringing out lots of videos saying, well, what about this prayer and fasting thing? There's so much evidence for it. Why isn't it in there? And you just go, because they're artists. And then, so how can you figure out something that's subjective? You can't. That's why it seems so complicated to people. It's like, oh, it's an art form. It's like trying to figure out like the climate science stuff. That's the drivel that's coming through the pike of like, if it used to be global warming, and then it's like, if it cools, well, that's the same sort of thing. It's just weather extremes now, and it's like, you're just looking at it going, well, apparently we're all going to die in 12 years. AOC was saying that. I guess I wonder what her date is now, these doomsday scenarios. But if you actually were into that and studying that and reading all the articles on that, it would just confuse it. It will confuse you to the back teeth. And that's the whole thing with the critical text theories, the methodologies that they use. It's rubbish. It's pseudoscience. It's quackery. That's all it is. It's like psychiatry. It's a psychiatry. People think it's all a science, and well, I've got a chemical imbalance in my brain and all this. No, that pharmaceutical companies just want cha-ching. They want your money. So for you to be ill, it's like, oh, I didn't even know I had that. Better Google it. Oh, yeah, I guess. Then placebo comes in and you start behaving like that, you know. There's so many rip-offs, and this is just another scam. And unfortunately, undiscerning Christians are getting sucked in, and they are raking it in. Billion-dollar industry, the Bible industrial complex. There's money to be made. But let's continue. Yes, Joseph's website, Breathe Press is Gold. A. Hannah says, usually these critical text guys just learn how to say junk with overconfidence and assumed authority. And eventually there are enough of them. Everyone else sounds lame and don't realize the evidence. Yeah, and it's the consensus of scholars. And that's the thing. People go, well, Bart Ehrman's always right, so he's their backup. So then they come out and say all these weird and outlandish things. And if you try and get them on details, they go, well, look at Bart Ehrman, you know. But at the end of the day, Bart Ehrman's I'm sure that he's shocked at how people rely on him. He's probably walking away from situations, laughing his head off, going, I just made that up. You know, and people can do that, but people just make stuff up. And he just has confidence. He just says things staring at people like, no, this is the way it is. And in this video, he goes through mistakes in the King James. And you can see his scholarship is lousy. He just has no idea. A. Hannah says it's like the liberal mainstream media and institutions and how they manufacture a narrative. Yeah, and that's about it. Like, if you were to go down the rabbit trail of some of the stuff that's come out in the media in the last 10 years and follow it to the nth degree and believe it all, I mean, half the time you just go, well, they've got a barrow to push and there's money to be made. And even the whole atheistic, agnostic side of the critical text, it serves a purpose. And I've often said that people like, James White and Dan Wallace and Wes Huff, they love the fact that someone like Bart Ehrman exists because it keeps them in a job. What else would they be? If everything was just all boring and it's like, well, the King James is accurate. It's a faithful translation of a Textus Receptus and Masoretic text, and all the Bible societies were printing those types of Bibles. Where's the fun in that? Where's the money in that? But when you got these saucy stories all the way through and every word is questioned and everything's just tipped upside down. So, the Trinity, no, that was invented. The deity of Christ, they just squeeze that in somewhere. And, this verse, no, that's a copy from here and there and Q and, just make up stuff, And it just, in the end, when you know your stuff and you're listening to these guys, they sound like a bunch of crackheads just sitting around like, where are we going to get our money from? And it's really that bad. And people want to have an intellectual discussion about this, about certain manuscript evidence and all the rest of it. But if they can't get past the fact, like even I just tuned into Myth Vision before, and they keep calling God Yahweh with the special Yahweh. And I'm like, you're saying the name of Jupiter. Like, it's so bad. Get the name of God right. Number one, get the name of God right. Number two, maybe the names of, Jerusalem, and say them properly. But it's like they haven't even got the first thing down, and it's like they're not even interested in studying it. Like, maybe I should become an atheist and have all these videos like, they're worshiping Jupiter. You know what I mean? I could give them ideas. But it's like, I don't know, that these guys just aren't scholarly. They're not thinking outside of the box. They don't know Hebrew. They don't know Greek. They claim to, because half of them have been apologists lying about their abilities in linguistics. And then they jump over to atheist world and they're like, yeah, I can read Greek and I know Hebrew. And, you know the alphabet. You know how to phonetically sound something and then quickly look it up on the side,
And he, among other things, was the chairman of the committee that was preparing the new Revised Standard Version of the Bible, which is a standard translation that a lot of people use today. And when I graduated from my PhD program with him, he asked me if I would serve as his research assistant for the NRSV translation. And so I did research for a couple of years with Metzger in preparation for this translation that was coming out. In the office that I had there at Princeton Seminary, the library, Sphere Library at Princeton Seminary, while working for the NRSV, there was a metal box that was sitting on a bookshelf that Metzger loved to show people and tell about. Inside this box were ashes. And the deal was this. In 1952, the Revised Standard Version of the Bible was published, and many conservative Christians thought that it was filled with heresy because they had mistranslated important passages, and that this translation, the RSV, was in fact inspired by the devil. And so there was a pastor in North Carolina, where I now live.
The RSV had so many stupid problems, calling the virgin a young woman. Obviously, in that culture, a young woman was a virgin. If you were a faithful Jewish person, you obeyed the law. But what they're doing is anachronistically putting the standards of today on a secular society and putting it back on them, and saying, well, of course she's just a young woman. She's probably not even a virgin. This type of thing, and causing those problems. But what we see, even the Revised Standard Version, in Matthew 1, they had a footnote that instead of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ, as it says in the King James, what they had was Joseph, the father of Jesus. And they have a footnote there saying that, I think it was some manuscripts say this, or when you look it up, the manuscript that says that, it's not even a Greek manuscript. It's the Sinaitic. So it's a Syriac Bible, the Sinaitic Syriac, I think it is. And so there was one manuscript with that reading, and they put it as a footnote. But why would you do that? It says that Joseph is the father of Jesus. You're just going to cause problems and cause doubt. Why are you going to some obscure, weird, tiny little thing that no one is even believing and putting that as a main footnote there? There's hardly any other footnotes in chapter 1. There might be a few, like, a spattering of 3 or 4, but it's like, that's one of them. So, and this is one thing that Dean John William Burgon was pointing out, that in Westcott and Hort, what they were doing was putting in things like 616 at Revelation 13. And at the time, there was only one manuscript with that reading. Now, I think there's 2. I think Dan Wallace he's right into that sort of thing and believes that it could be 616, And the reason, Dean Burgon said the only reason they've put that in is because it's a novel reading. It's like, it's a bit saucy, it's a bit exciting sort of thing. There's no practical reason they put that in, and it actually causes people to doubt the text. So that's why we say they're doubt-producing footnotes. There's no reason to put them in. When the King James has footnotes, the whole reason is because previous editions, Tyndale, Coverdale, Geneva bishops might have had a different reading there. So they're like, well, we've worked all this out, and it might say, some say this. And so they're talking about the culture that they're in that day, where people had been reading the Geneva Bible, reading through, say, Matthew 1, where it says, or Jacob. King James doesn't have that. And but the Geneva and the bishops do. No other one does, and no other modern version does. And so it just says, well, some say that. So it doesn't look like it's just a typo. And also it's to do with other TR editions that were before the ones that they were using. And so they were practical footnotes for an audience that was already well saturated with the Geneva Bible, Bishop's Bible, Textus Receptus editions and all that. So they knew these issues. It wasn't just like, hey, we found some weird, full-on, bizarre thing that's not even in Greek, talking about Joseph being the being the father of Jesus. So it destroys the virgin birth. Let's put that in there. Like, there's just no reason to do that. There's just no practical reason, except for the people who are putting together that Bible are heretics, and they're weirdos, and they're psychopaths, and they want to destroy your faith, just like Bart Ehrman does. They have that burning desire in them to destroy your faith. But Bart Ehrman's just come out and said, hey, I'm an atheist, hey. It's probably, he probably did that because it's like a bigger audience. Like, if he was like doing all this and trying to pretend he's still in the church or something, like, he probably wouldn't have sales. But he's like, hey, I'm an atheist too, guys. And everyone's like patting him on the back, like, yeah, you're one of us, and then, sales goes through the roof, Like, when you're looking at deception, deceit, I don't think we go far enough sometimes to realize the depravity of how deep some people will go to make a dollar or to get their point across, or they're filled with anger against God and they want to show it. They want to tell people this God of the Bible is a disgusting pig of a God. Jesus is this, and they want to blaspheme all the time. Like the whole thing of Bart Ehrman's latest video where he's saying that God ordains Jezebel to lay on this bed and be raped, and all her children are to be murdered according to God. Like, what is? It's like, okay, so God's a Satanist. You know what I mean? It's like, what on earth? How did you come to that description? I've read tons of commentary and they're not coming to that conclusion. But, don't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Who took a copy of the RSV in the pulpit and took a blowtorch and announced this publicly before he did this, so he'd get a big crowd, and he attacked it with a blowtorch. And as it turns out, it's hard to get a Bible to burn. Not because it's a Bible, but just because it's a book with hard covers. And it's hard to get. And so he had this blowtorch going, and it wasn't working. He finally says, well, it's like the devil. It's hard to burn. And so finally the thing caught fire, and it burned. And he collected the ashes and sent them to the chair of the RSV Bible Translation Committee, saying, this is what I think of your Bible. So Mester would always show off this box of ashes, and then he would say that he's glad that in the modern period, it's only a copy of the translation that gets burned rather than the translator. since he was the translator for the RSV. So,
and I've seen Metzger say that in a very similar sort of setting, and he's like, the guy sent him the burnt Bible. It was all in ashes, and he was like, well, they used to burn the translators. Now, if they're only burning the Bible, well, that's fine, sort of thing. Sort of like a bit of a joke. But they say that type of thing to make out that they're persecuted, and also that they're doing God's will. People are irrational by burning these things. But seriously, the RSV is like, you may as well use it as toilet paper. It is a blasphemy. It is I think when I was first going through all of James White's material, because I went through pretty much everything from the beginning, and I was going through his interview with Gail Ripplinger, and Gail Ripplinger they're both low-hanging fruit. James White and Gail Ripplinger, it's like, okay. So you're going through all that, but at one stage he was talking about how people call the Bible's Bible perversions, and he said, I've stood up against Bible perversions, and I was like, that's interesting. And I think he sort of let the cat out of the bag by saying that he probably came against the RSV. Most people who were conservative did stand against the RSV, and they complained about it. There's lots of articles by people who aren't King James only or TR only people who still follow the critical text. They were saying the RSV is like an abomination. It's got those horrible readings in it. It destroys the virgin birth, and And it was very deceptive in how they brought out in 1946, they brought out the New Testament. And so a lot of people went, this is fantastic, this is great. And then they brought out in 1952 the New and the Old, and the New had been completely amended to have all these weird readings. And so it was quite deceptive. So there's sort of, it's a bait and switch situation. And but yeah, I think James White actually stood against the RSV, and it wouldn't surprise me that he did that. A lot of people who would be considered conservatives were saying, yeah, the RSV is a terrible translation. And so even that new Revised Standard Version is not really something that conservatives go to. They usually go to the New American Standard Bible, as if there's really that much difference. You know what I mean? To me, it's like a Jehovah's Witness preferring the old typesetting of the Watchtower magazine over the new one. You know, it's like you're splitting hairs. They're both bad, but the RSV was extra bad. You know, so, and I'm not even sure if the guy who burnt it was a King James guy. I'm not even sure about that, because there was so much vitriol. Maybe I should chat GPT that. Was the guy who burnt a Bible and sent it to Metzger a KJV only, or what was he? Huh? They're saying it was Peter Ruckman. I doubt that. I know ChatGPT can be very, very, very wrong. Maybe it was Peter Ruckman. I've got to pursue this now. What proof do you have that it was Ruckman? It's saying there's no citations. It's sort of it's backing off from saying it's Ruckman now. Anyway, good old ChatGPT. So A. Hannah says, wherever Metzger is he's probably thinking right now that North Carolina pastor was right. Yeah, well, yeah, that's the thing. If it's a North Carolina pastor, that's not Ruckman. Ruckman was in Pensacola. And yeah, ChatGPT, Ehrman said he was from North Carolina. I've never heard anyone say it was Peter Ruckman. Sorry, ChatGPT. You I should use Claude, I think. So true, Hannah. It's all about the narrative and controlling the masses. Grock says he's a pastor from North Carolina, but no sources name him. I wonder if it actually really happened. That would be an interesting thing to look into, because I wouldn't put it past these guys to just go, yeah, well, look, someone threatened me, or, you know, oh, that would be a good thing for Bible sales. You know, like, I wouldn't put it past them. Like, to me, I think these guys would lie to their own grandmother and steal money out of their purse. You know, like.
Yeah. So in the modern period, sometimes people burn translations, but in fact, at one point they did burn translators. The first translator of the Bible into English was William Tyndale. And he was, in fact, burned at the stake for his efforts. he wasn't the first to translate the Bible into English per se. The first to do this was John Wycliffe, or at least the followers of John Wycliffe in 1382. And you're going to have, there's going to be another session devoted to the Wycliffite Bible here as part of the series that I'm sure will be extremely interesting. Wycliffe translated the Latin Bible into English. And so the deal is this. The Christian Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, is written in Hebrew, and the New Testament is written in Greek. But throughout the history of the Western Church, the Bible that people used was the Latin translation that had been done back in the 4th century, starting with the great scholar Jerome. And so the Roman Catholic Church historically had used the Latin Bible. So Wycliffe, or at least his followers, translated the Latin Bible into English in the 14th century, 1382. And this caused a lot of Roman Catholics to be upset. A lot of Roman Catholic clerics didn't want the Bible available to people in their native language because they weren't sure what use they would put the Bible to. And so they wanted to be able to tell them what was in the Bible and what the Bible meant without people reading it for themselves. And so they got upset about this Wycliffite Bible. And there was a convention in Oxford in 1408, obviously in England, where there was a policy passed that said that nobody could translate the Bible into English anymore without being authorized by the church, so that they wouldn't allow Bible translation. And this became the law of the land in England in the early 15th century. When Tyndale came along in the early 16th century, he decided that in fact he wanted the Bible available to people, that he didn't want it simply to be available to the clergy. He wanted people to be able to read it. And he wanted them to read a translation that was made from the original Hebrew and Greek, not simply from the Latin Vulgate. He was trained in Greek, as most people were at that time, starting soon before that at Oxford. So he could read Greek well, and he picked up Hebrew as well. And so he started translating the Bible. He translated the entire New Testament. And in the process of doing this, he knew he wouldn't be welcomed in England, so he actually had to go to Germany to do it. And he translated the New Testament. He ended up being betrayed and thrown in jail. He translated the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, and in jail, he translated Joshua to 2nd Chronicles. So he translated about half of the Hebrew Bible. But he ended up, as I said, being betrayed. He was in jail. They ended up executing him for violating this law of 1408. And so he was burned at the stake in 1536. And so that's what happened to the first Bible translator, William Tyndale. After Tyndale, what a lot of people don't realize is that the King James Version was not the first English translation. Tyndale's was, and it wasn't the first one after Tyndale. There were a number of translations that were done. There were 7 major translations after Tyndale, but the most important ones were one by a companion of his, Miles Coverdale, who did a translation in 1535 that was, in fact, accepted in England, even though Tyndale ended up being executed the next year for doing exactly the same thing. The Great Bible, that was also done by this guy, Miles Coverdale. And these are entire Bibles. So Tyndale didn't get through the entire Bible because he got killed first, but these are entire Bibles. The Great Bible is called.
So I don't think Coverdale's was accepted initially. I know the Great Bible was. But I'm pretty sure Coverdale, he continued the work. It seems like I know Bart Ehrman doesn't know that much about the Reformation history, and sometimes just says things that are just completely wrong because he's got no interest in that era. His interest is in the critical text. It's like having a Jehovah's Witness interested in what Luther said or something. It's like he couldn't care less. He wants to know what the Watchtower says.
Even though Tyndale ended up being executed, that was a companion of his, Miles Coverdale, who did a translation in 1535 that was, in fact, accepted in England. Even
I'm not sure about that. Was Coverdale's Bible accepted in England? Well, it was accepted in 1537, so a year after Tyndale, and so that gained support. And then it sort of became replaced with 2 years later with the Great Bible. So he's got the 1535 thing saying, well, it's accepted, and then Tyndale died, and sort of making out that they've accepted it, and then they've killed Tyndale for no real apparent reason anyway. So
Tyndale ended up being executed the next year for doing exactly the same thing. The Great Bible, that was also done by this guy, Miles Coverdale. And these are entire Bibles. So Tyndale didn't get through the entire Bible because he got killed first, but these are entire Bibles. The Great Bible is called the Great Bible not because everybody thought it was so great, but because it was enormous. And so it was designed for churches. So you'd have a big Bible up there in church so people could read it. There's a Bible called the Geneva Bible in 1560, which was called the Geneva Bible because Protestants who were in exile from England had gone to Geneva, and they decided they wanted to do a new translation of the Bible. And they did this translation in which they put a lot of marginal notes where they lambasted the Catholic Church. These were Protestants who really didn't like the Catholic Church, and among other things, they had marginal notes that indicated that the Roman Catholic Pope was the Antichrist of 666 of the Book of Revelation, and other things that didn't make them very popular with their Catholic friends and neighbors. Finally, there was a Bishop's Bible done in 1568 by a group of bishops. These two Bibles here, the Geneva Bible and the Bishop's Bible, were the first Bibles done by committee. Today, almost all Bible translations are done by committee, and there are different opinions about that, about whether that's a good thing or not. Some people think that really what a better thing is to have somebody's individual genius come through in the translation, and other people think that it's better to have a committee because that way you can sort of get rid of the idiosyncrasies of any particular translator. But sometimes translation by committee doesn't go so well because it's like writing a memo by committee. It's just you get the kind of the lowest common denominator. It's not so good. Well, the thing about all of these Bibles is that even though they're separate translations, all of them were heavily dependent on Tyndale's translation. And that, of course, that is what we're going to see with the King James Bible as well. So let me say something about where the King James Bible came from. King James became the king of England in the early 17th century.
So obviously, the vast majority of things that he's saying are accurate, and that's just dates. You could get that off Wikipedia. It's not controversial really. But then he's going to start sort of having a dig at the King James Bible, and eventually he's going to start saying where there are problems in it. Troublefire says, why doesn't Ehrman name Wycliffe's followers or Lollards? Probably because someone might research them and actually learn some truth. Well, he's probably heard about them, but he's not really interested in this period of time. He's interested in the mythical times of the early, the first century, second century, as if he can get that far back and decipher everything there. So he will say, well, where was this in 150 AD? And it's like, what are you talking about, Bart? Why don't you just deal with information that we've actually got? Because this is one of the things where oftentimes these scholars are making predictions and fantasizing about what happened like 2,000 years ago, when they can't even sort of figure out the basics of what's happened even recently, let alone just 400 years ago. With the King James, something very well documented, they'll have to spice it up, sauce it up, and just believe a whole bunch of nonsense about it. And also, some of these so-called contradictions, errors in the King James are easily fixed. It's not like you have to be a savant to figure it out, or it's like a Sudoku puzzle. You're trying to work it all out. Sometimes it's just that someone's reading it wrong. This is fixed because of this, or actually in the Greek, it can be interpreted this way or that way, and it's like, okay, that fixes the problem. But they still constantly have these list of errors that they go through and try and win you over to their position, going, see, it's got an error. And it's like, well, that's been debunked. Like, how many, there'd have to be 1,000 websites on the internet that talk about this. Like, are you being serious? And this is one of the things, sometimes you look at the credibility of these guys, and it's like in the area of politics. If someone's just going to be constantly wrong, constantly lying, constantly, just saying misinformation, after a while, when they open their mouth, it's like when, someone says, how do you know when a junkie's lying? Well, their lips are moving. And oftentimes it's like, how do you know a politician's lying? Well, their lips are moving. They're saying so much rubbish and on things that are really, and this is one of the easiest ways to detect if someone's lying to you. Find something that is like it should be agreed on by pretty much everyone, and start talking about it and see if they start lying about it or making up stuff about it. You'll soon see if they're lying, because everyone else knows that that's solid. Yeah, it's like a 1 + 1 = 2 sort of thing, but they're still going to embellish and they're still going to go on about it. And that's what I find with issues about the King James, talking when they're saying, oh, he's a homosexual and he had little kid, he was Epstein. Yeah, King James Epstein. It's like, where are you getting this from? But then those same people turn around and say, well, Erasmus Epstein as well, and George Washington Epstein, and Jesus Epstein. Jesus was an Epstein as well, suffer the little children to come on. He wanted them to suffer. I've heard this type of rubbish, And people, when you're out street preaching, people are more bold to say really weird things because they know they're not on camera, But people who are on camera, they're a little bit more reserved. But I've heard all sorts of nonsense and just misquoting the Bible. And I usually pull people up and go, you're actually quoting that out of context. It means this. And sometimes just those little things can cause not them, but the audience to go, yeah, you're wrong, dude. We all know that. But they embellish, and this is the thing. One of my videos that I just recently did was enough rope to hang themselves, talking about the Judas contradictions, so-called, with the Gospels and the Book of Acts, and there's no contradiction. It's just there's just nothing wrong with that. But they give themselves enough rope to hang themselves. They talk about something so frequently that they start to believe their own rubbish, and they actually start embellishing on it. And it's like, man, if you can't get that right, what else are you gonna? You may as well just be making stuff up, And so anyway, Hannah says, I think Matthews was accepted by the English government. Matthews, okay. The Matthews Bible used Tyndale Old Testament books available, and the rest Coverdale's Old Testament and Tyndale New Testament. Okay. So I just found this site here, which is pretty interesting. The Royal Collection Trust. And he has the Holy Scripture of the Old and New Testament faithfully translated out of the Dutch and Latin into English. This is very interesting. 1535. So it looks like they go right into all the details of this. So that looks very cool. Anyway, I'll throw that back down. Let's continue.
He had been the King of Scotland, and he was related by blood to Queen Elizabeth, and he became the king. And one of the big problems that Elizabeth had faced during her reign was that the Puritans in the English church didn't like very well the established church. That they thought that the established church, with its bishops and its ceremonies and its rituals, were not really what religion was supposed to be all about. And so Puritans were sort of like really hyper Protestants. And in the Church of England, you also had people who were very traditional. And the Puritans and the traditionalists were at each other's throats. And so King James, who was concerned about such things, called a conference at a palace at Hampton Court, which is just outside of London, and southwest side of London. It was a palace built by Henry VIII. And he had this Hampton Court conference in order to have the Puritans and the traditionalists figure out how to get along with each other. Well, so they had these debates, and it didn't go too well for the Puritans. But at the end of these debates, somebody one of the Puritans suggested, we need a new translation of the Bible. They wanted a new translation of the Bible because they didn't like the bishop's Bible that had been around. But James was actually on the side of the traditionalists, and he liked the idea of a new translation because he thought, if we get a new translation, he could quiet these Puritans, who are the ones who wanted the translation. And so he agreed to the new translation, but thinking that this would be a way of promoting the...
So I can understand Bart Ehrman, like in 2013, having that type of mindset, since then, the last 10, 12, 13 years, people have acknowledged that King James, even while he was the King of Scotland, had wanted to do an update of the Bible. And so this was already on the cards. If you follow Bryan Ross's material, he actually went to there was a specific place in Scotland where they decided that they should have an update of the Bible. And this was in, I think it was 1599 or 1597. It was around then. I haven't got the details in front of me, but it was, this was already in the mind of King James. He's, the people, the Scottish government around him, they already knew about this. So it wasn't something that would have been hidden. And probably all the people at the Hampton Court Conference probably already knew this, because they would have been having a new king come along, and they would have been interested in what he's thinking about. And so some people probably already had opinions and things like that. So when this was brought up, it wasn't just the first time that this had been brought up. Now, there had been others like Hugh Broughton, who had, is it Hugh Broughton? Yeah, Hugh Broughton, who had already done some sort of translation work, and it was rejected, and he wasn't put on the team of scholars. And he was very good in Hebrew, apparently, very good in original languages, but it was more like a Young's literal translation type of thing. I've heard people say, oh, he's a critic of the King James. He was a smart guy. And all you have to do is go through and look at how he translated things. And it's pretty much the same as the King James, but every now and then he just throws in a weird thing. And it's like, that's why they didn't get him. And he had some weird ideas. So that people were coming against his type of thing and saying, look, there's too many translations coming out, because he brought one out. I'm not sure who else had. And so some people were on that side of the fence. Other people were like, yeah, we think this is a great idea. And so, but yeah, the Hampton Court Conference is usually the place where people hone in on and say, well, that's where it was brought up with the millennial petition. And so there were a whole bunch of issues that 1,000 pastors had called upon. I think, was it John Rogers? I think it was John Rogers. Called upon him to sort of bring before the king, and he was like a representative of that. So the Hampton Court Conference is where all that came to a head. And I don't think it was in 1604. I think it was 1603. I'm just double checking that. Not that I really care about, whether Bart Ehrman's got a year right or wrong or whatever, but Hampton Court Conference. No, it was in January 1604. Yeah, so it was 1604. Okay, cool.
Of the traditionalists. And so there were, he made it happen. There were 6 committees appointed. Mainly these were people who taught at Oxford and Cambridge, the 2 universities in England at the time. They formed 6 committees, 2 of which met at Oxford, Cambridge, and then in London at Westminster.
So he's used the 47 translators. My count is about 60. And yeah, I would say there's 60. That's not including people who were outside of those groups who they had access to whenever they needed expertise on something. So there would have been people in their communities. Say, for example, a lot of people have watched that movie, Luther. And what Luther did when he translated the Bible is he actually went and talked to local butchers and asked them about certain words that they would use because of the sacrifices and how they were doing things. He would ask local butchers, and he would use their terminology in his Bible. So he was just trying to get the proper usage. And so there would have been people in English society who knew certain things about botany, certain plants, certain scientists, and obviously these guys are in Oxford, Cambridge, Westminster. They have access to a whole bunch of other scholars. It's not just them, and they can ask them questions, and they can get certain answers on controversial things. And so there were a lot of people involved with this translation.
There are questions among scholars about how many people actually participated in the translation, but the best guess is that there were 47 translators who were all skilled, highly skilled in Greek and Hebrew. Today, when somebody's highly skilled...
Okay, so we'll get to his thing in a second, because he says something that's been repeated over and over and over, this little section, about the qualifications of the King James compared to scholars who are like Bart Ehrman, and Bart Ehrman is one of the main people in the academy, and he knows their skill set, and he's saying it's really lousy. The King James guys are so much more superior. So I'll just catch up with these comments. A. Hannah says Hugh Broughton was smart, Hebraist, he had issues, a bunch, yes. And he also was very critical of a lot of the other scholars on the team. So he wasn't a team player either. But that's not always bad. If you've got a bunch of idiots, it's good to be the odd one out, but I think he was wrong to stand against it. Boulder's Line says, I guess you can't say Tyndale was burned at the stake. BooTube censoring live chat now. Okay, I'm not sure about that. Might just be a mistake. A. Hannah says John Reynolds. Okay, did I say John Rogers? Yeah, close. Okay, so this is the section where Bart Ehrman basically says the King James guys knew their stuff so much better than Bible scholars do today. Listen to this.
In Greek, like Jeff Seifer and me, we're considered highly skilled in Greek. That means we can kind of slosh our way through a Greek text if we have a good dictionary sitting next to us. These guys, including King James, could speak Greek and did speak Greek to each other when they felt like it. And they could read Hebrew like the newspaper. So, I mean, these were serious scholars who, their excuses, they didn't have TV. There was no ESPN. What did they do? They sit around, they studied Greek. This is what they did. And so they were, and Latin and Hebrew and what. They had 6 committees in these places, and they started the translation. All of the people on these committees were church people. They were either Puritans or many of them were bishops or had some kind of connection, official connection with the church. It took them 7 years. It was finished in 1611. It was called the Authorized Version. In America, we call it the King James Bible. In England, they call it the Authorized Version, although authorized is a bit of a misnomer because the King James never really officially authorized the translation, and it was never authorized by an act of Parliament or anything else.
So that just makes me wonder, it's like, okay, it wasn't officially authorized. How do you come to that understanding? To me, this is just an anti-King James argument. It shouldn't even be called the authorized version. The King of England, he's the guy who wrote the Divine Right of Kings. He commissioned it, and they finished the project and printed it and handed it out to the churches. What more do you want? Do you want him to write a thing saying, okay, well, I, King James, authorize this, but that's what they're looking for. Wouldn't just the fact that this was worked on and published and sent out to all the churches in the land, wouldn't that just prove that he's authorized it? You know what I mean? It just seems so strange. And then it's like, it was never really, something that Parliament voted on or commissioned or anything. I'm pretty sure that it was the king and then Charles, his son, who was beheaded. Parliament came into play then, not before. Before that is the Divine Right of Kings. And so that it doesn't matter if Parliament are agreeing or not agreeing or whatever. To me, this I'm not even sure what you would call you would just sort of call the people like subjects of King James. I guess maybe they were called Parliament or whatever. But the whole thing of having a Parliament that is like separate from the royals is after Charles, as far as I understand it. And he's beheaded, and so the Parliament run the country, but then they reinstate a royal family. And so then you have the Parliament and the king, and one's sort of policing over the other. And so anyway, I've never really understood why people make a big fuss about whether something's authorized or not. To me, it just doesn't make sense when it was authorized by the main authority in the land, made it all happen. And what did they want? Someone higher to give it the tick, or did he have to write some sort of certificate at the front? I mean, they've got the dedication to King James at the front. It's dedicated to him, all this work. He's the main authority in the land. He commissioned it. Like, what more do you want? So anyway, I can't understand that argument. I've tried to think about it, and my head just spins around and I vomit out green. So A. Hannah says, they could read and speak Greek, Latin, and Hebrew. Not quite a sloshing group. The A team, yeah. And so that's where Bart Ehrman's like, well, when we were studying, we would just slosh around with some dictionaries and, fudge our way through it. And he's saying these King James translators knew Greek, they knew Latin, they knew the languages very well, could speak Hebrew like the newspaper. And modern day scholarship is not like that. And so this is quite telling, coming from someone who's so high up in the academy, coming from someone who's worked on the New Revised Standard Version, coming from someone who knew Bruce Metzger personally and all of his associates and Kurt Aland and a whole bunch of other people. He's like, well, we don't have the same skill set as the guys in 1611. That they're way more superior than us. And that in itself is a huge admission. He's basically saying we're just sort of, it's like the King James guys are like Olympians, and Bart Ehrman and crew are sort of like just a local football team who could hardly even kick a goal, sort of, that they're pretty hopeless by the sounds of it, sloshing through. I know he's trying to be funny, but there is a lot said there, and we know it to be true. We know that when these people are put on the spot and they're asked questions about the Greek language, that they don't know how to answer because they can't speak the languages. They need to slosh through their dictionaries.
But the people who translated it considered it to be authorized, and so they call it the authorized version. One of the striking things about this authorized version, the King James Version, is just how much it is reliant on earlier translations, especially the translation of Tyndale. This reliance, in fact, is admitted by the translators. In the preface of the 1611 edition of the King James Bible, it says, truly good Christian reader, we never thought, this is the translators talking, from the beginning that we should need to make a new translation, but to make a good translation better, or out of many good ones, make one principal good one. That hath been our endeavor. And so they're admitting that they're not, in fact, ignoring what the other translations have done. They're going to consult those as well as look at the Hebrew and the Greek. What they don't tell you is that they basically ripped off the Tyndale translation.
No, they didn't rip off the Tyndale translation. I'll let him talk for a little bit more, and then we'll just go through this issue, because this is his first sort of real slander against the King James translators, just saying that they've just ripped it off. And I know Bart Ehrman says things to be sensational, okay? Where if he was in an interview, like to say he was here now, he would say, look, I was just saying, that although basically did sort of rip it off, you might use another word like copied, or, he might say that sort of thing. But he's making out that, the King James guys sort of did something wrong here.
So the reality is that the King James Version technically it's a revision of the Bishop's Bible. The Bishop's Bible was a revision of the Great Bible, and the Great Bible was a revision of Tyndale. in the exhibit out here, in the exhibit in the room in here where they've got the Bibles and things, one of the very telling exhibits is they have a passage from Matthew chapter 5 in the Tyndale Bible, in the Geneva Bible, and in the King James Bible. Just look at them and see how similar they are. The best guesstimates are that the King James Bible in the New Testament reproduces Tyndale's words in 92% of the cases. 92% of the words are simply taken from Tyndale. So, people celebrate the King James as being the greatest, and it is. I mean, I will go on to say it is the great classic of American literature, of English literature. It's a great classic of English literature. But the genius goes back to Tyndale. And this isn't often enough acknowledged by people who celebrate the King James, not realizing that, in fact, these translators had predecessors. I should say, by the way, that most of the Bibles that are used today, not most of the Bibles, the New Revised Standard Version that
Okay, so he's going to go on to that. Well, let's let him continue his thought.
That I did research for was a revision of the 1952 Revised Standard Version that the guy took the blowtorch to. The Revised Standard Version was a revision of the 1901 American Standard Version, which was a revision of the 1881 Revised Version, which was a revision of the King James, which is a revision of Tyndale. It all goes back to Tyndale. When they were doing the NRSV, by the way, one of the things people don't recognize is how do you come up with a name for a new translation? And so when I sat in on the committee meetings for the NRSV, they debated, what are we going to call this thing? They ended up calling it the NRSV, but there were other options. The one that I really hoped they would go for, that I thought they were going to go for, is that since it was the translation, it was a revision of the RSV, I was hoping they would go with the RSVP. They didn't do it. They suggested though. All right, so.
Okay, so Hannah says, the thing about it is Bart only knows Greek, so he thinks in terms of the New Testament, but the Bible is more than the New Testament. And that's the thing. How can you translate Matthew when Matthew has so many Hebrew idioms in it that are in the Greek that you have to understand Hebrew and Greek to really understand the idioms and to bring them across as a faithful translator. And so that's why having people who are versed in Hebrew, in Greek, and in other languages like Latin, Latin, like today, I guess, American scholars, a lot of people know Spanish, and, obviously the Romance languages, the Rome section comes from Rome, from the Latin. So they're Latin based. And so, but even just being able to look back at Greek documents, Hebrew documents, Latin documents, and read the early church writers in these languages. I remember hearing James White saying how many things were still untranslated from Greek early church writers and Latin and others. And I was thinking, yeah, but the King James guys didn't have that problem. They could go back and read these things in their original languages. And if you're fluent in a language, you can see certain things in the Latin that don't really come through in a translation of it, because not all of these things are translated faithfully. Like the Bibles are, there's so much more emphasis on the Bible being translated faithfully, but some other works are a bit loose, And I remember D.A. Waite saying that when he learned Greek in, I think it was 1948, when he was going through that material, he was learning like the Greek of Plato. He's reading like the Odyssey, these type of things. And he said it was a lot harder to learn that ancient type of Greek. He said, because when you get to the Bible, it's very precise. And people have been arguing over, a certain word for hundreds of years. And so they've honed it right down to only one or two options, where these other things, a lot of people, the translations are quite loose and they're paraphrastic and all this. So Bart Ehrman not knowing other languages and even just not even knowing Greek that well. I've listened to enough of him that he basically knows it as good as James White does, sort of thing. A. Hannah says, Coverdale and Geneva guys were very important, but the King James Version translators knocked it out of the park. Yes, so these guys did a great job at building a foundation, and it's sort of like their ceiling became the floor that the King James guys could work on. And a lot of their work too like the Geneva Bible. Like say Beza, he worked on the Geneva French, headed up that team. He was involved with the Geneva Bible as well, and many different people from England were involved with that. And so it actually helped with a lot of different language Bibles. And then after a while, that all came back because the King James guys were reading, the Italian, the French, and all these other languages, and they were interested in how they had become translated into their languages and used some of the methodologies that they had used. Anchor David says they discussing serious Bible issues and laughing like hyenas. I think this is more so. I don't think it's a church setting. I think it's the Manifold Greatness sort of tour that they did, and it seems like they did it for a couple of years, where they went around with probably original 1611 Bibles and Geneva Bibles, and they had a full display so that people could go along and listen to this stuff. And I guess Christians would go along to it, but I wouldn't suggest that it's a full church thing. It's more like just an academic type of thing. Everyday Man of God Ministries is in the house, saying good evening, Nick and fellow brethren. Bold as a Lion says the modern critical text guys of today cannot even compare themselves to the King James translators. They are not polyglots or even close. And that's why when I was going through the Ankerberg debate, the main guy from the NIV committee, I can't remember what his name was, but he was saying, in Psalm 12, all the King James translators got it wrong there, but I know Hebrew and I got it right. And I'm just there thinking, man, like seriously, you'd want to double check yourself, dude. It's I don't know. It's like someone just putting their hand up in a classroom when Einstein's wrong and saying you're wrong. It just seems so strange that they would think that 50 of the greatest scholars of that era, I mean, even people who were half as good, we're talking about people like back in the day, like Coverdale and Tyndale, like they were still really, really good. The King James guys, that they were so much more advanced on top of that. And people just dismiss their work as just like, they didn't know what they were doing. I know what I'm doing. I know the Hebrew. But when you check them and you're like, okay, so how much Hebrew do you know? Well, and they're sloshing along with dictionaries and things like that. They don't really know the languages. And so basically Bart Ehrman's claimed that the King James Bible ripped off Tyndale. That's what he said. So Ehrman says the King James Version reproduces Tyndale 92% of the time and implies the genius really isn't just in 1611. But basically, that's not criticism. This is just how something works. If you have the same type of thing, like something that is a continuous thing. Like if you look at the King James, it's considered early modern English, okay? Where Tyndale's isn't. It's still, what's it classified as? Middle English, I'm pretty sure. So it's even a different type of English. So you're looking at 100 years before it, say 85 to 95 years. A lot of changes happened. English has become a lot more literate. A lot of things have occurred. So even if you were to get Tyndale and bring him into the future, he would just, out of general usage, have to change a whole bunch of things because the usage has already changed because there's been such a change in society. But Tyndale was basically working on the same Greek tradition on the Textus Receptus. But we've got to understand, too, that there are differences between Erasmus's editions, Stephanus, Beza, and so the ultimate outcome of the King James, they're just being faithful with what's in front of them. and there are those differences. But 92%, he's making out that that's just so close, but 94% is the difference between the critical text and the King James. And we know that's a huge step. So we're just talking about English at the moment, but when you look at the Greek, 94%, the critical text is 94% Textus Receptus. So it's really only 6% difference, but we can talk about that 6% for a long time. It's a lot of change. And so when he's trying to make out that they just sort of copied from Tyndale, you've got to understand that a lot of the words you only have a certain amount of options. So if you have, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, I mean, what are you going to change in that? Many times you'll just have an and a the, and you can't do without them. They just have to remain the same. And that's the vast majority of words. Like even the K in Greek, if you learn the K, I've got Bruce Metzger's book on the shelf that tells me this, you've learned 5% of all the Greek in the New Testament just by knowing the word and, or and, even, and also. I'm pretty sure that's what Metzger says. I've got his book there. Lexical Aids for Students of New Testament Greek by Bruce Metzger. And I'm pretty sure that's what he says. I'm just rabbit trailing. Okay. Anyway, I'll look at that when Bart Ehrman's talking. Yeah, so Bart Ehrman's sort of basically saying that it's plagiarism. The King James openly acknowledged dependence on earlier editions in the preface. It's not deception, it's complete transparency. And to have 92%, it's actually 8% change, which is quite a fair bit. You're nearly looking at 10% change. And I've seen people get really excited that there's 80%. Like some people will say, well, Tyndale's is, or the King James is 80% Tyndale, like, because this number sort of varies. And people get all excited and say, oh, see, they copied from Tyndale. And it's like, I don't know how people can fathom what is, like, without looking at all the details, what is changed. Because a lot of people can't even fathom the difference between the critical text and the Textus Receptus. 2,900 less Greek words, 8,000 changes as well. That's a lot. And how do you put that into real, provable examples, And so I think it's just something that, he's read and he's thought, well, maybe I can make this spicy. So he's like, oh, they're plagiarizing. And so Tyndale's is based on Erasmus. The KJV, they consulted Erasmus, Stephanus, Beza, mostly used Beza. They refined and standardized and corrected previous English renderings. And so that's not ripping something off. It's the same work. It's not like they're writing a different Bible. And the thing is, too, like Westcott and Hort, they come along with a whole bunch of weird and different things, and it might be very different, but that's because it is a different book. It is a different Bible. These guys actually were translating basically the same text, and if it's 92, that's still a lot of change. So they still did quite a lot of their own work. And so the whole point that he's making there is just, I don't know. It just seems like this stat that people want to bring out, and they should really use real-time examples and say, okay, this is how Tyndale translated it. Like go through Psalm 23 or something and just show the difference. And even that, sometimes there's one or two words difference, So by Bart Ehrman's logic, the New Revised Standard Version ripped off the Revised Standard Version, which ripped off the King James Version. And so that, but yeah, anyway, it just seems like a nothing argument, but he's trying to make out it's quite controversial. So Everyday Man of God Ministry says, Nick, I got you a KJV 2023 yesterday. Wow, that's great. And yeah, I always enjoy people being critical of things that I've done. And yeah, if you can spot things that you're not happy with, let me know. I'll gladly go through everything that you send. A. Hannah says, it depends on how you make that percentage calculation and what you use and how you measure. I've heard from high 70% to low 90s. Yeah, it's strange. And some people say 85%, this type of thing. And half the time I don't even know why they're bringing that up. Without real-time examples, people they're not going to work it out. Because how much of a difference is, say, the 1611 to the 1769? Like, are they counting spellings and things like that, or what's the difference? A. Hannah says, but that cannot include the Old Testament books that Tyndale did not. What a classic example of the King James guys copied from Tyndale. Okay, so he only did the New Testament. He did the first 5 books of Moses and Jonah. So there's quite a lot of the Old Testament he didn't do. What did they do then? Well, so the whole going back to Tyndale thing only works with the first 5 books of Moses, Jonah, and the New Testament. And then they're getting this percentage, and it just makes it more and more flimsy. And so, yeah, very good point. That's gold. Boulder's Line's got to feed the animals. Got to leave these animals and feed some other animals. Did you order the 1602 Purificata? He forgot again. Just as the ESV ripped off the Revised Standard Version. Yeah, they had to buy the copyright from the World Council of Churches, which in 1948, Billy Graham said the World Council of Churches is probably going to nominate the Antichrist. Like Billy Graham said that. It's quite amazing. Okay, let's continue.
Let me talk about the King James Version and the many virtues of the King James Version. And there are indeed many virtues of the King James Bible. For one thing, there are very, very memorable passages. Passages that people who know their Bibles, these passages, they just sound right. They sound like the Bible. Let me give you some examples. Genesis chapter 1.
So that's interesting. I know Jack Mormon said that. It sounds like the Bible. So I guess Ehrman could have watched that debate. He did debate James White by this time. And so, watching another debate with James White in it and listening to Jack Mormon, where he says it sounds like the Bible. But I remember when Jack Mormon said that, like it sounds like the Bible, the James White with his theatrics and rolling his eyes and doing all this drama in the corner, and the other, moderator just sort of laughing like a little kid, and people in the audience, laughing at them. It just seemed like it was sort of like a mocking thing. And I wonder if he said that, well, it sounds like the Bible. So I wonder if he sort of stole on that for a bit of a joke, I think he probably did.
This is from the King James. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. You can argue that nobody's done it better than that. That is very good. Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And so on. Very familiar, very moving and powerful. Isaiah chapter 40. verses 3 to 5. The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low. And the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. Move into the New Testament. For example, the passage that's in the room over here, the Beatitudes from the Gospel of Matthew. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. And the last example, the Gospel of John, chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Well, these are very powerful ways of phrasing the biblical text. They're direct. They are rhetorically effective. They the schemes of the scanning schemes work very well. They're just very moving and powerful. So there, the King James is, for this reason, has been one of the great classics of the English language that people should read for the sake of the language, I think. There are not only memorable passages in the King James, there are memorable phrases that have become virtually common phrases in the English language. Genesis 4, am I my brother's keeper? Matthew 5, the salt of the earth. Matthew 18, where 2 or 3 are gathered together. Matthew 26.
And so when it comes to these ones, David Crystal wrote a book called Begat, and he went and examined unique sayings that are in the King James that are not in previous Bible editions, and he only found 11. So I know some people have said, there's like 400 sort of idioms that come straight from the King James. And I know most of them have come to us from the King James, but they're not original to the King James. He said, David Crystal said he could only find 11 that were original. Most of the others already appeared in the Bishop's Geneva and earlier Bibles.
The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Luke 12, my favorite. Eat, drink, and be merry. Romans 2, a law unto themselves. Romans 13, the powers that be. James 5, the patience of Job. Phrase after phrase, the King James has come.
And so this is the book Begat. What do the following have in common? Let there be light, a fly in the ointment, a rod of iron, new wine in old bottles, leak the dust, how the mighty have fallen, etc. So he goes through all that. And I remember listening to a lecture that he did, and he said basically there's 11 unique ones in the King James. The rest of them are already in earlier Bibles. So yeah, that's an interesting one, the King James Bible and the English language, David Crystal. So let's continue.
Come into the English language and are phrases that we now use in completely different contexts just because they're such memorable phrases. The impact on the English language has been enormous. Many people argue that Shakespeare is the most influential individual on the English language, and I think that's probably right. If you look at the number of words that Shakespeare introduced into the English language, it's some phenomenal number, and there's no doubt that Shakespeare has had probably the largest impact on the English language. But I would argue that William Tyndale is a close second, because the King James Bible has made such an enormous impact on the English language and the way we speak the language, the way we understand the language, and it's getting a lot of these words from Tyndale. So in some respects, it's Tyndale who's made the impact, but it's directly through the King James Bible.
And so that's true. Words like Passover, that was invented by Tyndale. And by the time the King James came around, they used it in 28 times out of 29 times Pascha appears. 1 time as Easter. Then there were other things like atonement, which were unique words. And so it's quite amazing that he was actually making up words for the English language that have stuck around, and it's very interesting.
And so there is no doubt that the King James Bible is one of the great literary productions of Western civilization. So I think that is an absolute certainty. That's not to say that the King James Bible is without its problems. There are people today who think that the King James Bible is the only acceptable translation of the Bible.
Okay, so usually what happens here is when people talk about the King James, they're not just talking about that it's a 400-year-old book, and of course it's going to have some archaic terminology in it, which everyone admits. Like D.A. Waite has the Define King James Bible. He's basically inadvertently admitting that there are older words that they're hard to understand. The Trinitarian Bible Society, they have word lists, and I'm pretty sure they have their own Bible with marginal notes. I haven't seen it, and so I guess I'm always talking about something that I know is there, but I've never really looked it up or followed it through. Even Chick Tracts, they have a list. It's like 800 words that you can go through and look up, and as you're reading the King James, you can have that in your Bible as a little bit of a thing at the back that you can go to if you find a hard word. And of course, Mark Ward's been going through sort of trying to do this type of thing, but because he lacks in some areas, he makes mistakes. Like one example is the word study, spedauzo. If you go to Greece today, you want to do university or college education, it's called spedauzo. That's the name of further study. And the issue is spedauzo usually means to just be diligent about something, but in a context when it's talking about using your gray matter, using your brain, the word study is a perfectly adequate word to use. And so in a philosophical context, to use study to translate spedauzo, it's perfectly fine, where Mark Ward makes out that that's problematic. And so he does that with a lot of words. He'll make out that there's we've got problems with this and we need to change it, and really he's just going with modern versions, and that shows you that these modern versions are lousy as well. And so the thing is, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. How do you rightly divide the word of truth? You study it. And so if you have spedauzo there, in a normal context, it means, if you're working hard. And so the King James translates that accordingly. But when it comes to a study in your mind, spedauzo, it means it's a philosophical thing. And so study is the exact word that you should be using. But Mark Ward he doubles down on that. He doesn't. So many people have pointed this out to him, and that's the problem. And so Bart Ehrman, in having, he's talking about problems with the King James. Oftentimes people conflate archaic things, just old words, with having issues with the King James. So things that we have today, which they didn't have in 1611, the people could read it and understand every word. Now it's like, okay, well, there's a few words here and there I have to look up. They conflate these issues. And so this is acknowledged by everyone. And this is one of the things. Mark Ward comes along like, I've shown you how to fish. I'm not just giving you a fish, I'm showing you how to fish. You looked things up in the Oxford English Dictionary and this type of thing. I've got a 1992 book there by D.A. Waite, and in the back he's got question and answers. And someone said, what do you do if you have an archaic word? And he said, look it up in the Oxford English Dictionary. Exactly what Ward's saying, like in 2019. Like he's saying that in 1992. And it's like Mark Ward's like, I'm the only one. I've done so much. I've advanced the King James so much. And it's like, it was only just because people like Sam Gipp were coming along and saying, don't use a dictionary. and Gail Ripplinger and the real sort of the lower hanging fruit King James onlyist guys, they were saying don't use a dictionary, which is like basically just made a whole bunch of pastors dumb. Really, if they were using dictionaries all the way through, they'd be a lot smarter, but they're not. And so sometimes they say things that you can tell, like, they're not using a dictionary. You cringe. But if people hadn't gone with that sort of low hanging fruit concept of you can't use a dictionary or you can't use Greek and Hebrew helps, of course, none of them are going to be infallible like the Bible. You have to think. And you have to discern, whether that is correct or not or whatever, but at least learn the things, not just like, the Holy Ghost will give you, understanding. And then like I question people on these things. And I remember there was a guy recently, I won't mention who he is because he contacted me about it. And he was talking about the whole word, what was it? Psalm 119, great peace have they that love thy law, and nothing shall offend them. And he was talking about how people get so easily offended nowadays, and it was all about someone's feelings getting trodden on. And I'm like, that's not what it means. To offend someone means to put a stumbling block in their path. And he didn't know that. And like, he's like right up there with one of the main dudes. And it's like, just use a dictionary, man. I guess because I've gone through and done translation work, I've had to look all these words up because you don't want to be translated into something offended. Well, my feelings are offended, or even the whole thing of Romans 8, where it talks about condemnation. People think condemnation is a feeling, or when the pastor was saying that I felt condemned. It's nothing about your feelings, okay? That can be a definition, like I feel condemned or whatever. But when you're looking in Scripture and it uses the word condemned, it's talking about your position. You're either condemned to go to hell or you're not. You're going to go to heaven. And so the law can condemn you as a sinner. This type of thing, a condemnation. It's not about, I feel condemned. You're condemning me sort of thing. But people read condemn and they think that, and so use dictionaries. and that's one of the problems is a lot of King James guys are like, hey, let's not use dictionaries. And then they're all like, I don't know what this word means. And they look like they're illiterate. But, obviously people who have been of the more tamer, TRKJV crowd have been using dictionaries, and they're not, it's not an offense, a stumbling block.
Most of the people who feel that way know nothing about the actual history of how the book was put together. And I would suggest that people who think that really should read up on the history of the King James Bible to see how it was put together. And one of the books on display out here for sale that I did not write, but I have read, is by the same name, Manifold Greatness. And it's a great little introduction to how the King James Bible came about. It'd be worth reading if you want to see how the King James Bible was put together.
Now, he seems to make out that most people who think there's no problems with the King James, they've never read anything about it. Or what I find is most people who are critical text people, most of those guys have hardly read any of that material. I think I've got Manifest Greatness. What have I got here? Carson, King James Only Debate, In the Beginning, King James Bible by Alistair McGrath, Defending the King James Bible, Identity of the New Testament Text, so many versions, The Cradle King, Power and Glory, which is God's Secretaries in America, that's what it was called. Yeah, so anyway, I've got tons of books, and I find when I talk to someone like, say, who was in the Dean Burgon Society, they were like, yeah, I've read God's Secretaries. Like, they've read it. But if I ask critical text people, they've never read it. And it's not written by a TRKJV person. It's written by someone who thinks, yeah, they've got whole sections in there how King James was gay and all this sort of stuff, but you just sort of overlook it because you can tell they're reading that into the text. Just like they say David and Jonathan were gay, or Jesus was gay with his disciples, or whatever. It's like, that's ridiculous. But Bart Ehrman's basically making out that people who think there's no problems with the King James, they haven't read enough. I know tons of people who have read material on the King James, but like critical things about the King James, read about the translators. And so Bart Ehrman he either just doesn't know that those people are out there, or he's being deliberately slanderous. One interesting thing was Bruce Metzger was on the mailing list for the Dean Burgon Society. I remember D.A. Waite brought that up. He said one of the people who received his bulletin or whatever he had was Bruce Metzger. So I guess he was, and even D.A. Waite said, I guess he just wants to keep an eye out on what the enemy's doing, which was interesting. I'll go through some of these comments and we'll catch up, and then I'll continue. A. Henner says, Bart is right. There are memorable passages. It is the word of God. Yes. And yeah, when he was reading through all that, it's like, well, man, it's really hard to get any other translation that's better than that. Emryo, shall stand forever's in the house. Emryo says, hi, Nick. If Bart Ehrman were to ever believe in a perfect and preserved Bible, I'm convinced it would be the King James Version. Can you imagine that? Bart Ehrman, a KJV onlyist. Well, I think it's going to happen. I think, I'm not sure about Bart Ehrman, but I think some people are going to actually see that we have all the answers. I think they've been arguing with the critical text people, and they haven't been arguing with KJV people. We have the answers, and half of their contradictions and all that, we're like, yeah, that's in your Bible, not in ours. And so almost half of their argument just goes away straight away because we're King James people. And the other half go away because they're not understanding things. They've got a Dan Wallace, James White, Wes Huff, Mark Ward understanding of things, and they've never looked deep into them. And some of these things are just becoming so commonplace that people are not arguing them anymore, because that they realize they sound pretty lame when they bring up something and everyone's rolling their eyes going, oh, this has been debunked like in the 80s. But pretty much everyone's saying it. So we're actually creating a standard. And I think what we need to do is just push into the atheist community and the agnostic community and go, well, what do you guys think about this mistranslation here? Because they're bringing up all this Mark Ward stuff, study and Spedauzo, and it's like, hang on, let me hear you say that again. And that they're actually revealing their own illiteracy and their own ignorance. And so, and like, you look at what Wes Huff did with that guy, Billy Carson, and he just made a video of him, and it just wrote him off because he was calling it the Sinaitic Bible, and he just made up a bunch of stuff about it. Like, imagine just going into, like, say, a video like something like Myth Vision, and just going point by point, like I'm doing now, point by point by point, just going through and just going illiterate, scholasticism, he's making that up, and just go through it all like we do with our videos. And I mean, that should speak volumes to people. And I think a lot of people are going to go, yeah, sorry, I was listening to the credible critical text guys. I think we got way better answers than those guys. And if we don't, we can just jump into their camp, look at what they're saying and go, oh, yeah, that's okay, and grab that and use it for ourselves. Tribe with Fire says the King James Bible was made to be auricular, an auricular translation, as the English language had been cemented by Tyndale after translating. It was read aloud for all the translators, and if there were any objections, they were addressed. Yes, and that was appointed to be read in churches. And that's one thing that I'm always mindful of is, like, say, with the plural issue, having you as singular usually in a certain context, but then when it's talking about plural, having you all, that's something that if you heard that, you would get that. But if you just, like, say, the Jehovah's Witnesses, what they do is they have the word you. One is in capital letters and one is in small letters. The one in small letters is singular. The one in capital letters is plural. But you can't get that when you're speaking. It's got to be something that's heard. And so that's an interesting thing. So going through John chapter 3, where there's a few places where it matters whether it's singular or plural, that's an interesting thing. And so the King James having marvel not that I say unto thee, singular, Nicodemus, ye, everyone must be born again. I mean, it just, you can hear it. You don't just have to read it. Well, with the Jehovah's Witness one, you have to read it to know it's singular or plural. So Received Text says, Tyndale coined most of the new terms, idioms, Hebraisms. He was a smart guy. He knew his stuff. Try with Fire says, hey, embryo. And yes, it's hard to imagine. Shall Stand Forever says, I watched some of the Trinitarian Bible Society documentary on Tyndale. I already have a biography of Tyndale, but the Trinitarian Bible Society documentary was AI generated. When it came to graphics, very off-putting. Didn't finish it. Okay. Yes, sometimes that can be hard. I often thought that maybe about 10 years ago, I remember seeing the latest games that were coming out, and people would be wandering around shooting, and they're wandering around farmland, and it looks like it's World War II. And I was like, man, this is so realistic, And I often thought you could do, certain things within that. But yeah, some of the AI stuff is good. I think you have to be good at it. And some people aren't good at it, and they're making things. I'm watching some old battles and things like that in AI, and even some biographies. There's some of the things I listen to are the other. No, I'll have to get it. The People's Profile, I'm pretty sure it is. It's not always 100% accurate, obviously, when you're talking about politics, or the she who's running China. They might embellish a little bit, or they might leave a few things out, and they might forget to say that someone's a CIA asset, or whatever. But they go through history, and I was listening to one on the guy who made the Taj Mahal, and he was from Lahore, which is interesting because, I've been to Lahore many times. The People's Profile is a good one to listen to. And who else? Yeah, I think for the moment, that's probably, like, it's just a secular thing. And I guess too, sometimes it's good just to know general information, especially if you're in an arena where people are going to ask questions a lot, because if they do mention something about Japan and you don't really know who's running Japan, you've got no idea about it. You can look like it. Some people go, oh, he doesn't know anything. And that can put them off other things that you do know. So it's good just to have a general knowledge about stuff. But anyway, I am rabbit trailing. But yeah, sorry, they use a bit of AI stuff. Hey, Hannah, no, problems. Yes, problems with the King James Version. Embryo says, hello, tried and every day. This reminds me of so many scholars that say they live and build up this pretentious high regard for it, then drop a nuke on it. Yeah. I love the King James. I read it every day. Hey, I'm the biggest fan of the King James, but it's got these problems, None of the docs, so Try With Fire says, none of the docs I've seen about Tyndale can hold a candle to the plethora of books about him and his life story. Shall stand forever. Tried says, I can believe that. I think Tyndale making an actual movie, like I really enjoyed the Luther movie. I thought it was well done. Now, there were some bits in there that are a bit strange. You don't know where it is in time, you know. But apart from that, it was pretty well done. Like for what it was trying to achieve. Obviously, it's not a Christian thing, you know. But I think someone making a movie about Tinder, like someone like a Mel Gibson type of, you know, attention to detail. But even though he's a Roman Catholic, he did do the Oxford one. If you haven't seen that movie, it's worth a watch. The guy who wrote the Oxford English Dictionary. It's got some pretty weird scenes in it with this one guy who obviously has demons. He was prolific in doing definitions for the Oxford English Dictionary. But yeah, worth a watch. Anyway, I recommend it to anyone who's, you know, wants to understand how the Oxford English Dictionary came about. But yeah, definitely, I think Tyndale is that. Every time I go through Tyndale's life or just watch a little bit of a clip on him, I'm like, man, why hasn't someone made a movie on this guy? Like he has everything that you would want in a good plot, you know, where he's had to escape England. He couldn't do, he basically gave his life for his country elsewhere. He's an exile. And then he gets killed at the end. And he's like, open the King of England's eyes. I mean, that type of thing is like, you know, I just imagine, you know, the Passion of the Christ type of thing, or Braveheart, you know, that type of movie. Shall stand forever. We don't mention enough how the modern version defenders are making claims about the KJV and the TR. They're saying the King James Bible is wrong. They're making that truth claim. We let them off the hook too much. Yeah, I think we need to start, you know, in the spirit, slapping people, the cigarette out of people's mouths and saying, hey, prove it, dude, you know. It's a subtle point, but I hope it made sense. Yes. So Emerio's like, here comes the nuke. Yeah, problems with the King James, yeah. These critical text scholars have become so predictable. I saw it coming as soon as I saw the advantages of the King James. Yeah, it's like how to come against the King James Bible, praise it to the back teeth, and then mock it. Embryo, so true, Nick. The world is more receptive of a preserved Bible than modern version uses. A KJV onlyist doesn't struggle as much as a critical text scholar when talking to a Muslim. Yeah, I have no problem. A Muslim will say, you got contradictions in the Bible. I'm like, not with my one. Which one are you talking about? And usually they're like, oh, well, you know, the King James Bible. I'm like, show me where there's, if you can show me where there's a contradiction in that Bible, I will leave Christianity. I'll become your personal slave for the rest of my life. And that's what I say to them. I put them right on the spot and say, show me. And then the fact that they can't, I'm like, so you're saying that there's contradictions, what, you can't remember them? Or well, who taught you this? Where are you learning this from? Are you doing your own critical thinking? Or, you know, I just put them right on the spot. And I've had like 10 Muslims around me, like they're all Googling contradictions, and it's all NIV stuff. And, you know, you have to marry your rapist and all this sort of stuff. I'm like, well, King James doesn't say that. Oh, 1 John 5:7. It's like, okay. And I go through all those issues. And it's great fun. Shia Balouf as Tyndale is the latest Hollywood blockbuster. Shia Balouf. I'm not even sure who that is. Shia. And I spelled it wrong and it came up as Shia Islam. Balouf. I'm getting Sunny Islam. Anyway, I'll keep going. Everyday Man of God says the common thing the modern Bible versions have in common is they have changed from the King James. Yes, and they're based on a poor text. Yes. Okay, let's continue.
There are problems with the King James Bible, I think, in terms of its usability today by people who want to know what the biblical authors actually said. Now, that's a different issue from, do you want to read a great English classic? If you want to read a great English classic, the King James Bible is the translation to read. But if you want to know what the biblical authors actually said, the King James Bible has some problems, and I wanted to detail what some of these problems are. There are actually three major problems that I'll talk about. One is changes in the English language since 1611, because the language has changed. Most of you who are older realize that English has changed a lot in your lifetime. Yeah, so as we learn from our students all the time. So when I started teaching, never mind, I'm not going to do it. Second, the theological biases of the translators sometimes affected the way they translated the Bible. I'll give instances of all three of these. And third, the textual basis of the translation is a problem. So I'll talk about all three of these. First, I'll start with changes in the English language since 1611. As it turns out, there have been a lot of changes over these 400 years. There are words found in the King James Bible that we simply don't use anymore. Here are some examples. Almud, Algum, Charasheen, Chode, Cracknose. These are in the King James Bible. Gat, Habergion, Hosen, Gab, Meager, Niece, Nussings, Ouches, Ringstrick, Sycamine, Trow, and Wimples. There are a lot more. And I bet you know what these words mean.
What does Almud mean?
I have no idea. I think you put it in apple pie, but I'm not sure. The King James has interesting choices about which animals.
And so I know James White has a list of words in his book. And some of them are they're just common words. It's like he just copied and pasted them and just assumed that someone had gone through and checked them out. Maybe I can look up archaic. It doesn't have that section. But yeah, there's, I think it was Stephen Anderson. He just went through the list, and yeah, sure, there was some genuine archaic words, but some of them were, here we go. He's got, chambering, campaign, charger, churl, sealed, circumspect. And he went through this, and there were some that were like, very, very easy to understand. And so, but I won't read through them all here. But obviously, there are old words in an old book. Now, if you read Shakespeare, you're probably going to get similar words. It's just the way it is. And that's why, to me, this is the only real issue with the older King James language, is that some people struggle to read it. And that's why, I've worked on the King James Version 2023 edition. And to me, this is a supplementary, sort of guide to, you can read through that. And if you struggle with the King James, a lot of people claim to struggle with the King James. I read the King James every day. I don't struggle with it. I study it. I look up words. I think about it. And oftentimes I'm challenged on words. So I guess that gives me a bit of a advantage over the average Joe. But I do understand some people struggle with it. So that's why I've gone, well, especially like when I'm overseas, when I'm street preaching in Papua New Guinea, they understand what I'm saying in English, but most of them don't read the King James. They struggle with it. but they will read like an NIV. And that's where I'm like, well, they'll read even a New King James. And so that's where I was like, man, if someone did something better than New King James, because it got to the point where I could no longer hand out New King James Bibles to people. And especially with all the bad footnotes and things like that. So that's why I've done what I've done. So that if I run into someone who says, hey, I can't read the King James, I'm like, well, here you go. And that just solves that issue. I know Bible Protector, he claims that I'm trying to usurp the King James, trying to replace it and all this sort of stuff. I've never made those type of claims. He's just saying that, but so then he's got legendary animals, unicorn. I've gone through that. I've debated that issue. The scientific name for the Indian rhinoceros is Rhinoceros unicornus. Just means one horn. It's pretty straightforward. So a reem is probably a rhinoceros. A satyr is a type of goat. A dragon. People later on had a satyr as a goat with human features and all this. So they're anachronistically reading that into the verses. Dragon, well, they didn't have the word dinosaur until the 1800s, and so of course they're going to use other descriptions, your dragon, cockatrice, arrow snake, etc. So
okay, so the problem with animals in the Bible translators sometimes don't know how to translate certain words. I mean, modern today, even 400 years later, we don't know how to translate some words in the Bible.
Yeah, that's because you don't know the languages. If you knew the languages like the King James translators did, you would figure these things out.
Because it's talking about some kind of four-legged creature, and that's all you know. So what do you call it? Well, the King James, so in the King James, you've got unicorns and satyrs and dragons and cockatrices and arrow snakes. The first four are legendary creatures, and the fifth doesn't exist. It's not even a legendary creature. Nobody knows what it is. So modern translation.
Okay, so he's making this claim. Let's just have a quick look. Maybe Will Kinney would be very interesting. So let's type in Will Kinney. Unicorn, satyr, and dragon. I know he's done articles on cockatrice. And usually Will Kinney is the one who answers these issues. No, it's not coming up there. Here we go. Will Kinney. A cockatrice. Another term that is often criticized in the King James Bible, and he goes through where it appears. And it just says Webster's New World College Edition, 4th edition, says a fabulous serpent, supposedly hatched from a cock's egg and having power to kill by a look, or Bible, an unidentified deadly serpent. So that's the first definition. The second definition is a venomous serpent, Isaiah 11:8. Online plain text English dictionary. So I'll just skip over some of that because he's got lots of modern dictionaries and get to his conclusion. He's got a lot of Hebrew things here. We can see this simple equation between a cockatrice and a serpent in versions like Young's and Wycliffe, where these versions translate the Hebrew word as cockatrice in Isaiah 11:8 and serpent in Jeremiah 8:17. So they use both words, and so you can see, they're using it interchangeably as a synonym. So it's a serpent. So he's like, it's a mythical thing, a cockatrice. Well, there might be something that's called that, but it doesn't mean that everything that's labeled under that is a mythical thing. So, it's so easily, just looking at Will Kinney stuff, he's just got all these dictionaries. He's got a whole bunch of Hebrew, transliterations and things like that. And you read through it and it's like, yeah, that makes sense. Let's look at arrow snake. Okay. Okay. Jacob Parash. I was supposed to debate Jacob Parash in 2011 on Easter, but he backed down. And so anyway, people are talking about him here. So, and he is a critic of the King James. Arrow snake. The arrow snake, Genesis 49:11, margin is also a creature unknown to zoology. So this is obviously, Jacob Parash writing about this. Now, where's the answer for that? No, it's just got the same thing. I sort of went to the article thinking that they would have some answers for me, but they're just saying what Parash says, so it's not really helpful. Anyway, I'm rabbit trailing, taking up lots of time. Well, let's just continue on. Hannah, he thinks he and his critical text buddies don't have biases. Yeah. Yeah. And especially, half of these guys are unbelievers. Following Truth LJ, if you want to know what the authors originally wrote, don't listen to Bart. He doesn't even believe in God, let alone believe the Bible is inspired. Yeah, part of his whole mindset is to get rid of God from the Bible. So you just have all these, you got 66 different books written by all these different people, and they're all got different messages, and you have to read them individually out of the context of everything else. And so that's getting rid of God, getting rid of this, the one voice that's within the scriptures that most people testify is there. When you're a Christian, you're like, I read from Genesis to Revelation, and it's like God's written this whole thing, even though it's written by different people. But then they get rid of Jesus as well, because if you've got Mark, which is probably just someone making up stuff, maybe a few stories happened, but that they embellished. Then you got Matthew copying him and being a bit embarrassed by some of the things Mark said. So he added things and took away things, and Luke did the same. And, and then John sort of overlooked a whole lot and wrote a whole different thing. But it just cuts Jesus out. It cuts out the fact that these people actually saw Jesus. So they cut out God. They cut out the fact that Jesus existed. And these are eyewitness accounts of people looking at Jesus and repeating what he said. It's like, how come they copy one another? Well, if you're listening to the same speeches and the same stories and the same events, there's only a few ways to write that down, and so they get rid of God, they get rid of Jesus, and then they just start attacking. Like you'll listen to a Unitarian debate, and you'll think, that Unitarian's got some dumb ideas, and then Bart Ehrman, like a year later, is saying the same thing. And it's like, the Trinity's been made up, and Council of Nicaea, this and that, and okay. All right, so let's. Ahana says Lawrence Vance published a book that had archaic words used in the King James Bible that were used in present-day publications, if I remember correctly. And Lawrence Vance also has a list of archaic terminology in the NIV. And you look up these words, and it's like, I don't know what they mean. They're weird, they're strange. And then you look at the words they replaced, and usually it's a very simple word in the King James. And so that's quite an interesting thing as well. Everyday Man of God Ministry says, in many cases, today's English vernacular has gotten worse. It ain't be not no good. Maybe these guys can make an even more modern version use emojis and texting characters. It's already been done. They've got the emoji Bible. I think it was done years ago. Following Truth says, if you read Shakespeare, you get old words. That's why it's studied. You're meant to study the Bible. And Ehrman's wife is a scholar on Shakespeare. So she would know the archaic issues and all the rest of it. But he doesn't even, he's like, oh, unicorn, oh, it's a mythical thing. Where even in the footnote in the King James, it says, or rhinoceros. It's pretty clear. Following Truth says, if you read Shakespeare, you get old words. Yes, I just read that. Embryo says, first bullet point, Mark Ward. Shall Stand Forever says, yes, Vance has some good resources, books, very detailed. Following Truth says, there are lots and lots of words considered archaic in the King James Version that are also found in the NIV and ESV. Yeah, it's funny, like you'll hear, someone like a Wes Half or those type of people, and they'll say, oh, this word, or even Mark Ward, he'll demonize King James readers for this certain word, but then you look it up it's in the NASB and it's there, and they're using that word, and it's like, okay, are you going to do a whole video on the NASB and how dumb that is, Hey, Hannah, I've been reading Dante's Divine Comedy in my Harvard Reader, early 1900s translation from Italian. It is a hard read. That sounds hard. We're in the 21st century. We in the 21st century are just stupid. Yeah. Shall stand forever. Even Bible words like pride have been given complete opposite meanings over the years. Now everyone is proud of Johnny, the A role student. Wicked is used with awesome, etc. Yes. Following Truth says the mythical horse-like creature definition wasn't added to unicorn until the 17th to 18th century, so the KJV could not have been referring to that. Okay, that's interesting, because my understanding is, like the Scottish coat of arms has a unicorn on it. I'm pretty sure they called that one a unicorn. I've got a few books that do talk about unicorn. Actually, I can go to my unicorn article. Textus Receptus. And I've finally got my website up and running. I had lots of problems with it. But, okay, so that's the rhinoceros, 1550. And here's the footnote. And the unicorn shall come down, and it says, or rhinoceros. King James, do a Reems, has rhinoceros in the main text and unicorns in the margin. Interesting. We're looking for uni. Oops. Unicorn appears 135 times in this. Yeah, and that would be interesting when the mythical creature was first spoken about. So I know that some of these are considered mythical, but it's we're just not sure. And this thing, this Karkadan, could have just been a rhino. But yeah, in English called a unicorn later on. So yeah, very good point. 1851, Septuagint has unicorn singular, unicorno. They all seem to be saying rhino in Middle English definitions. So yeah, that's an interesting thing. Yeah, of one horn. But I wonder what they would have called that creature, because in this picture here, you can clearly see a rhinoceros, but then they did have like a unicorn in the background as well somewhere. But yeah, worth looking over. Webster's an animal with one horn. I see unicorn. Yeah, applied to the rhinoceros. That's just Webster's dictionary. There you go. Case closed. Sorry, Bart, you don't know English. And that's one of the things that I've heard often is that some of these Bible scholars don't know English. They just don't know the basics of English, you know.
Translations don't use those. Well, that's a problem if you're reading a passage and it's using one of these words, you know, so that's a problem. Some phrases in the King James Bible no longer make sense. Ounces of gold, collops of fat, knotty figs, lean with, I guess. The ground is chapped, a brazen wall, rentest thy face, and murrain of the cattle. So you get words, you get phrases, you get sentences that simply don't work in English anymore. And Jacob sawed pottage. I think that means he was cooking stew. And Mount Sinai was altogether on a smoke. That sounds illegal. Thou shalt destroy them that speak leasing, which sounds like something a real estate agent could be doing. We do you to wit of the grace of God. My favorite is this one. Ye are not straightened in us, but ye are straightened in your own bowels. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't sound good. He who let it will let. And then this incomprehensible, the words of the wise are as goads, and as nails fastened by the masters of assemblies, which are given from one shepherd. Actually, this morning I looked this up in some other Bible translations, Ecclesiastes 12, and they don't make sense either. This is one of those verses probably doesn't make sense in Hebrew. So, but in any case, it's impossible to know what they're talking about in the King James. Sometimes sentences do make sense that haven't changed. I will cut off from Jeroboam him that pisseth against the wall. I looked this one up in Hebrew, and you know, it's exactly what the Hebrew says. I will cut from Jeroboam, meaning the region of Jeroboam, I will cut off, I will kill anyone that urinates against the wall. That's what it says. But what it means is a man as opposed to a woman. And in King James time, they understood because men were still pissing against walls as part of kind of what they did during the day. So, so the modern translations have normally changed this to male as opposed to female.
Okay, we'll go through this and then I'll get to the comments.
There are other changes in language that are a little bit different from the ones I've been talking about. What I've been talking about so far have been changes that you don't know what the word really means. Well, the bigger
that's interesting. You know, Mark Ward's like, oh, I came up with the whole idea of false friends, and yeah, he's saying, oh, there's words that you don't know, you don't really know what it means, you know, sort of thing.
The problem is there are times when words in 1611 meant something different from what they mean today. And when you read the passage, you think you know what it means because the words make sense, but they make the wrong sense. See what I mean? Because the meaning of the word has changed. Okay, see what I mean? So, for example, I remember when I was in my 20s, I heard somebody preach a sermon. I was in a church, and somebody preached a sermon on Philippians chapter 3, verse 20, for our conversation is in heaven. And the sermon was about how you shouldn't tell dirty jokes, because your conversation is to be in heaven. And so you're not to use foul language, you're not to curse, your conversation is to be in heaven, which made sense from the King James. But it's not what it means. The word conversation in the 17th century is what we would use for the word something like citizenship. Your citizenship is in heaven. I mean, maybe it still means you shouldn't tell that joke, but it's not what it meant. You know what I mean? So Revelation 17:6. This is one of my favorites. So Revelation chapter 17. You know, Revelation is about this prophet who has these visions, these bizarre.
Yeah, I'm not really sure about the citizenship thing. I haven't really looked it up here, but as far as I would be concerned, conversation is your lifestyle. That's the first word that came to my mind.
Scary vision. And in 17, he has one of the most bizarre. He sees a woman who in the King James is called the whore of Babylon. The whore of Babylon is in a wilderness. She's seated on a beast. This beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. And she's holding a cup in her hand that's filled with her abominations of her fornication. And she is drunk with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. It's this horrifying sight. And after he looked at her, he says, I saw her and I wondered with great admiration. Well, admiration in the 17th century meant astonishment or amazement. You know, he wasn't admiring her. It sort of cuts against the point of the passage. Well, so these others. 2 Kings 11:1, Solomon loved many strange women. They may have been strange, but what it means is they were foreign. Non-Israelite women is what it means. Leviticus 14:10, the meat offering in Leviticus 10:14 is actually talking about the offering of grains, wheat and such. But, you know, calling it meat sort of changes the point. And so too with 1 Samuel 17, where Goliath carried a target on his shoulder. It means javelin. He's carrying a javelin on his shoulder. Psalm 88, in the morning shall my prayer prevent thee. It means come before you. Shall come before you. 1 Corinthians 10:24, let no man seek his own, but every man another's wealth. Which means well-being. It doesn't mean you're supposed to go out and covet his money. His well-being. In Acts chapter 10, the Apostle Peter sees a sheet that is lowered from heaven that's filled with animals. And in the King James, it says that the sheet is knit at the 4 corners. And knit means to be let down. So it's not that it's a sheet that has knitting at the corners. It's being let down. And Philippians 4:6, be careful for nothing, doesn't mean to be careless. It means don't worry about anything. Okay, so in the sense of don't care. Don't be full of care.
Now, most of those I know. I've heard them before. And yeah, I mean, it doesn't really affect me that much in a sense where I've gone through them. If I was to look at, say, is it Revelation 17:6, I think it is, in the 2023, 17:6, or is it 17:8? I'll just go a bit further because it seems to be blurring.
Don't worry about it. So anyway,
Looks like it's 6. Oh, yeah. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled with great amazement. And so to me, it's saying the same thing. And so those type of issues aren't really an issue with me, you know. And because what Bart Ehrman's doing is he's obviously going to go to other issues, but he's trying to, say, look, the Bible's just too old. This, of course, is the type of rhetoric that's been used by, I don't know if this was the main thing used by like Westcott and Hort in their day. Obviously, there were words that had dropped out of usage and had become archaic, etc. It might have been some of the reason that they were doing things, but it seemed more like they wanted to have Vaticanus and Sinaiticus readings. But nowadays, it's like, it's got to be readable, and the Bible's got to be updated like every 15 years or something to be a valid Bible. Where, like, to me, some of these things would have naturally been updated if Westcott and Hort just stayed out of the Bible picture, and you just had faithful people who updated things instead of like Solomon loved many strange women. It was just Solomon loved many foreign women, and it was just updated like that. I think people would have accepted it, but because of what Westcott and Hort's done, there is a reaction against that. People don't trust people to do any type of update. And because we've got people like Mark Ward going around saying he's an expert in languages, expert in updating words and false friends and all the rest of it, and we know he's not. Like these type of people are sort of creeping around, and they're making so many mistakes, and so people just don't trust. Like even with the New King James, I've pointed out so many errors, even just in some of the words that are updated, or some of the words that aren't updated as well. They're still really archaic, but because it looks like it means something. There's one example of be kindly affectionate one to another, which isn't talking about being kind. Kindly is from the German, like Kinder, like a child or familial. It's like a family type of love. Be affectionate toward one another like a family, you know. And so that's in the King James. Be kindly affectionate. If you know it's an old word, you might look it up and go, oh, that means this. In the New King James, it says the same. You think, well, it's updated. I'm not going to look up a word. And so you don't, and you get the wrong idea. And so that happens throughout the New King James, sorry, where they don't update properly. Anyway, we'll just continue on from here. And then once he goes past this issue, I'll read the comments.
Yeah, there are hundreds of these that you can come up with. And the problem with these, as I said, is that you read them and they seem to make sense, but they have a different sense from the way you would take them today. And so it's a problem if what you want to do is know what the authors meant. All right, so the other two problems in the text are the theological biases of the translators and the textual basis of the translation.
Okay, so he's going to go through the theological biases of the translators and the textual biases of the translation. So let's just catch up with these comments. Anchor David says, what, Holden and Shoe? Oh my, ye, thee, thou, thy, a Bible with pronouns. And once you understand those, it's not a huge issue, really. The use of pronouns alone is enough to leave modern versions. So that was Embryo, Bible Highlighter. And I just sort of remind Bible Highlighter, I'm promoting this through the show. And this is happening next weekend. The Textus Receptus King James Version debate. Is knowledge of the original languages necessary for King James Version believers who have access to modern study tools? So that is on February the 27th in New York time. So 8 p.m. New York time. And so basically for us in Australia, that is, so for Matthew Bashir and myself, we've got the same time. So that will be, I can't remember exactly what time, but that will be on basically Saturday morning. So for everyone else, it's going to be Friday night at 8. So don't miss out on this one. This will be a great debate. So I just sort of plug that, and I'm about to set up the StreamYard link for that and start sharing it around the place. So if Bible Highlighter, if you could go through, or if you're happy with what's here, all I've done on my, where have I got it? I've got it on my desktop, I think. Oops. Manifold, maybe, yes, here we go. So I've only just changed it a tiny little bit. I think I just put a white border around it. That was it. So if you're happy with that, I'll go with that. That'll be the main thumbnail. It's still in quite high resolution, even though it was just a screenshot. Yeah, so let me know if you're cool with exactly that. I'll just run with that. So, okay, I'll put those away. And I'll keep going with these comments. Bible Highlighter says, I would rather look up old words instead of going with accepted false doctrine in modern Bibles. Yes, absolutely. But I also encourage KJV believers to look at not only English dictionaries, but also original language words that support the King James Version. Yeah, and I think it's important to do that as well. And to also, you just like if you use a dictionary, you question everything. You do the same with those things as well. Embryo says, amen. Bible Highlighter, by the way, happy birthday. Okay, cool. Didn't know it was your birthday. Anchor David says to Auroch, Uru, Rhino, one-horned beast. The Auroch, So I know the Auroch has two, and they say it's stood on its side, so it looked like one. That was one of the. I had a debate with TurretinFan on unicorn issue, and so that was brought up. The Auroch. Thank you, Embryo. Had a great day with the family. Tribe with Fire says uni meaning single and horn reminds of poly meaning many, and ticks a blood-sucking insect, hence politics. Politics. Everyday Man of God Ministry says it's a rhinoceros. It's easy moving on modern scholars. Hannah says they hold the King James Bible to a higher standard. If you read a classic, it's dense. Scholars understand you need to research things because it's dense, but then they think you just come to the Bible and you're supposed to get it in the first read. Yeah. And that's the thing, even something that's in very readable, understandable modern English, sometimes you go through things and it's like you have to read it 4 or 5 times before you really get the gist of it, Bible Highlighter says, I take unicorn as a one-horned animal that we do not know for sure. There are lots of possibilities. I cannot say without the evidence pointing in one direction, but definitely one-horned for sure. Yes, very interesting. Hannah says, Bart is a loser. Embryo says, not to mention that some creatures have become extinct. Yes, that was the website that I just shut down. They had the Elasmitherium or something it was called, and it was 6 meters long and used to run like a horse. And so that's huge, Bible Highlighter says one also has to look to lexicons before German rationalism as well. It helps anyways. Yeah, I think a lot of people say, what do you go to? And I usually don't go to modern dictionaries and modern definitions. Like sometimes they're correct. I do have like Spiros of Hades, Strong's, basic sort of stuff. But if I want to go and do a full study on a word, I won't. Like I might have a cursory look at times, but if I'm going to do a full study on something, I will look at how it. One of the best ways is how it was translated, and like even just using the King James as like a reverse dictionary. You're like, well, they have translated it into 4 different English words. Let's look those words up, and then you get a good grasp of what that word means, because they were good at their craft. But yeah, looking at older dictionaries, Oxford English Dictionary, Webster's is pretty good. But then original languages, sometimes it pays to look at everything rather than just be stuck on one thing. And at least you'll read the modern stuff and you'll go, hang on, there's something different here. And at least you'll be aware that someone's trying to push something somewhere. And so Bible Highlighter says there are certain original language words that have been redefined by modern scholarship that came off the heels of German rationalism. Yes, indeed. Bible Highlighter says words have a semantic range of meaning, even in Hebrew and Greek. It depends on the context. Yes, very important. It's important that we know, because see, sometimes too, someone can understand some Greek words, some Hebrew words, but they don't understand English. And so they assume that there's a mistake or a mistranslation, just like what we saw with Bart, not understanding what unicorn means in the English language. He's like, it's a mythical creature straight away. That's his answer. And so he obviously hasn't, or maybe he has been shown that a million times, but we know what Bart's like. He'll just keep hammering something home that doesn't need to be hammered home. Embryo says, notice how Bart talks about the King James Version in a nonsensical way, using humor as a tool of persuasion, making fun of the word of God. No fear, no trembling. Bart is begging for wrath. And he tends to do this whenever he's talking about the Reformation as well, talking about Erasmus and Stephanus Beza, King James, etc. He will just use anecdotes, get everyone laughing. He'll mock all that whole thing. And then, but when he's talking about, Westcott Hort, you don't hear him mocking and laughing, like giggling like this type of thing, because he has a deep respect for them, A. Hannah says, gosh, Bart is a loser. Shall Stand Forever says, Bart believes what much of the modern church believes, errors in the Bible. That's true. Bible Highlighter says, yes, I look forward to that debate with you hosting, Nick. Yes, it's going to be good. And so, yeah, I guess we'll chat beforehand. During the week, we'll just sort of, have a bit of a back and forward. I'll make sure that Matthew Bashir is on the same page. We'll work out exactly what time it is in Australia, and I'll go through the format and I guess some of the introductory material and stuff like that during the week. Hannah says, you both need tuxedos and top hats for the debate. Image is cool. Those who have access to modern Bible study tools is quite a qualifier. What about Grandma, who is a KJV believer but doesn't have access to these tools? Okay, interesting. And it's on this channel, so you guys, you're welcome to ask questions and get your questions ready, for that type of thing. Bible Highlighter says, thanks, Nick. Embryo, this is their livelihood. They wouldn't have speaking engagements or books to sell if they had a perfectly preserved Bible. They'd have to keep this argument alive or they go broke. And that's the thing. They're just going to stir up any type of controversy. And that's what I see, like Bart Ehrman doing today, is he is just finding a topic like hell and saying hell doesn't exist, and just he'll just write a book about it. He'll do 10 videos on it, and then everyone will copy his stuff, and it's pretty wild. Nick, the debate will be here on your channel. Yes, it will be. Bible Highlighter says, it was the qualifier of my question. The question implies it is only for those who have access to such tools. So it would not apply to anyone who does not have access to such tools or who are not computer literate. Gotcha. Thank you. Helg says, for a text critic, Bart is very popularizing in front of an audience. He uses those typical talking points about the King James Version he knows the audience will laugh at. It's a popularity show for him. Embryo says, my nephew, and that's a really good point, Helg. My nephew told me that when he reads the King James Version, it causes him to slow down and read carefully. I believe God preserved it this way for this purpose as well. Okay. Bible Highlighter says, yes, Matthew Bashir wanted 35-minute openings each. Hope that's okay. That's fine. I mean, I'm used to going for hours and hours and hours. So however it comes out, that's how it goes. A. Hannah says, people will be tired if I have to listen to 35-minute opening statements. Cut it down to 15 minutes. Get that coffee going. Boulders Alliance says, I can't wait. This will be good. God willing, I'll be there. And so I've nearly gone for 4 hours, guys, and I'm starting to get a bit tongue-tied and a bit exhausted. And I think we're over the halfway mark. I'm pretty sure about that. Yeah, so we're over the halfway mark, and so I think he does have a Q&A at the end of this. So what I might do, I might shut this down, and we'll just deal with the theological biases of the translators and the textual bias of the translation. Now, I'll just move on to, I'll actually open a new tab and I'll just show you what I'm actually doing here. Bart Ehrman. So we went through the last lecture, but he's got like videos here. If we go to oldest, that's what we're looking at the moment. So I'm going to move from there, and I might go back and look at Cornthwaite stuff and all the rest of it, and then we'll go to this one, misquoting Jesus, this one here, and we'll just keep moving through some of these. Now, some of these do go for a while. Some of them are 2 hours. Most of these are like over an hour and a half to 2 hours. But then as we go through, some of them get shorter. It's 2 minutes, it's 19 minutes, 2 minutes. And so it will get quicker. But I do want to eventually, like this is 11 years ago, but it does seem like he dropped off YouTube, and it sort of goes from like 9 years, and then it just jumps to like 2 years really quickly. 8 years, 7 years, 6 years. And so I don't want to miss anything. And so I know it could be very painful to go through a lot of this. Yeah, like Bart Ehrman in the Bible. Okay, so this is when he starts doing his regular thing with, what's her name? Megan Lewis. And yeah, and so one of the reasons why I haven't been doing 2 videos on the weekend is just out of busyness. And so last weekend I only did 1 video. This weekend I'm just doing the 1, and hopefully I can get back to doing 2. So next weekend we've got the debate, and then I'll do a video the next day. But yeah, so that way I can get through stuff a little bit quicker. So if we look at, say, Cornthwaite here, if I go to his videos, we can go to the oldest. Now I've gone through that one, 5 things I wish I knew before leaving. So I've gone through 3 at the top there. This 13-minute video I haven't gone through yet, but it'd be great maybe to go through that and this one in one go. And so I just want to continually go through that. And these are only like a year ago. And he's bringing out stuff that's usually about 20 minutes, like some of them 10 minutes, some of them 20. So it's quicker stuff to go through. But he's talking about a lot of the same things. And I just want to get to the point where we know what he's going to say next. We know he's going to lean on Bart Ehrman. We know he's going to say, well, they're using the Septuagint. We know he's going to say, well, it was the Judas contradiction that caused me to doubt the Bible, this type of thing. So that way, when it comes time to me challenging these guys to debates, and basically calling them out as chickens because they won't debate me, we pretty much know everything about them. It's going to take a long time. In my mind, I've always got this sort of dream that, I could do this full time. Obviously I can't. Usually I'm doing 40 to 50 hours a week work on top of all this, and on top of, doing my Bible website stuff and everything that I do. It keeps me busy, but I am able to listen to lots of material, which is very helpful. So I've gone through lots of Cornthwaite stuff. You can see here, like this, I've gone through that one, gone through that one, gone through that one. So it's not all of them, but it's quite a lot of these I've listened to already, which has given me a good standing, so I know what this guy's going to say and where he's coming from, and what to expect. But then there's also, what's his name, Myth Vision. And he seems to be bringing out a video every day. It's like, man, like, like a 3-hour video or something every day. So his older stuff, and when you go through his older stuff, it's so lame. He's got this Robert Price guy who seems like a, I don't know, if he doesn't get his way, he has a tissy fit. And he debated Bart Ehrman, and at one stage he just sort of threw the mic on the table and wouldn't take it. And people were like, "What are you doing? You're acting like a little kid, you know." Yeah, so anyway, I want to go through some of his stuff, and I'm going through their earlier stuff because you want to know where they're coming from, and it's in their earlier stuff that they're going to say a whole bunch of stuff that later on they're going to be really careful not to say, you know. So but then there's also what have we got? Cornthwaite, Bart Ehrman, Myth Vision. Then there's this Dan McClellan. Internet personality, and I just thought he was just another sort of dude, but he actually goes to the Society of Biblical Literature. They announced this guy on the Bart Ehrman program that he's going to be speaking. I'm like, oh, I just thought he was just some guy in a shed, and so I don't know much about these guys, and that's why I'm going through their stuff now. He seems to have been a Mormon. So, yeah, I'll go to his. Oh, I actually haven't subscribed to him. That's why. I'll subscribe. That way I'll get every one of his videos coming up. And as you can see, I've gone through where it's red. I've gone through those videos. And yeah, nothing too out of the ordinary. Just either really weird or Bart Ehrman stuff. Again, same stuff. So that's why I want to go through from the oldest. So from these ones, so 4 years ago. And also the thing is too, when these guys are studying, sometimes in the field of textual criticism, it's like examining like Jehovah's Witnesses or something. They're going to say things that you're like, oh, I don't really know much about that, you know. I don't know much about, you know, the 1975 prophecy that failed and their excuse for it. You know, I know it happened, but I don't know all about it. And so when someone like Dan McClellan is saying things and he's saying, well, I'm educated in this and I've got this, you know, master's degree in that, and I want to know exactly what that is. So then I can school myself slowly to the point where he's at. And if that's needed, because sometimes these things can just be a nothing burger and it can be a bunch of nonsense that just needs to be debunked. But yeah, so anyway, I'm going to go through that stuff. So there's quite a lot of stuff that I really need to go through. And I sort of feel going in this direction is a good direction to go in, because I feel we've almost exhausted the whole anti-TR thing and anti-King James thing, unless, you know, Wes Huff brings out another video or Mark Ward does. I mean, Mark Ward's itching to just do anti-King James stuff again. I don't think it's because he's got a concern or anything. I think he's actually quite embittered. I mean, imagine coming against the King James guys. Like, I've had King James guys attack me, you know, like the Ripplinger types and the Ruckman types, and it's full on. And you're like, man, and like, let alone be sort of like a liberal guy. And, you know, anyway, so I've got a lot to study, and this just seems like the direction that I want to go in. And I'm listening to, like, we had Lydia McGrew on, we interviewed her. She seems like she's doing, you know, 70%, like, because she's not TR based, you know, some of her answers are like, well, you know, God can make mistakes in the Bible, you know, this type of thing, where yeah, I just think that that's completely wrong. But she does have some very interesting answers. And there's also the Testify guys, these guys here, who have some very interesting answers. to Bart Ehrman material. There was also a guy I subscribed to recently who was, maybe it's down here, who basically does videos against Bart Ehrman. So yeah, they're not really showing that, but I should really listen to what other people have said about Bart Ehrman. I haven't listened to that much stuff. Wes Huff actually did a very interesting thing against like Jesus Interrupted or something like that, and he made some good points, and I was like, oh, that's pretty good, so maybe we can glean from those things. So I'll catch up with the comments, and then I'm going to shut it down. So we've got 10 million more comments. No. Please pray for the homeless this weekend. Going to be another nor'easter headed our way, and they've been dropping like flies here. Okay, that's pretty wild. So yeah, sorry to hear that. Emilio says, be sure to like everybody. Yeah, that's very helpful if people do that. God bless. Every day, man of God, don't forget to order the 1602 Purificata. I was reading Purificata and trying to say Q at the same time. That's why it came out weird. Boulders Align, for sure. Praise be unto Christ. He alone is the source of good working through us. A. Hannah says, cheers, Nick and all. Read your Bible, subscribe if you haven't already. Subscribe or sunscribe. The suntan. Tribe with Fire says, God bless, Godspeed, and good night to all. And thanks for Nick for all you do. Never change your outro, Nick. I love it. Yeah, I love it too. And I like the music because when Udio first came out, the Google AI thing, I just kept prompting it to do this and to do that to make it sound like what was it, the Interstellar type of vibe, and it just did all this stuff, and it had a Scottish thing in there, and it had a Arabic thing, and it was, yeah, it's pretty cool. That's just AI, man. It's so good. Like with music and stuff like that. But obviously, I asked it who burnt that Bible, and it said it was Ruckman, and it couldn't offer anything for it. It just guessed. It's like it wasn't Ruckman. He lived in North Carolina. So if anyone knows who did that, who sent Metzger that Bible, that'd be great. Or if there's any footage or any writings about it, or and yeah, so that's about it. So I'll play the outro. God bless you guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.